welcome to the special coverage of tonight's Liberal leadership debate. I'm David Cochrane in Ottawa, and in just 15 minutes, candidates vying to become Liberal leader and very likely Canada's next Prime Minister will face off in the second and final debate. There are four candidates: Frank Baylis, Mark Carney, Chrystia Freeland, and Karina Gould. They are set to take the stage in Montreal. Tonight, they debate in English. Last night, they debated in French. And for our special coverage, I'm joined by the CBC's chief political correspondent, Rosemary Barton, and some very familiar faces if you watch Power and Politics. Greg McEachern is a former Liberal ministerial staffer. Fred Delory is a former Conservative campaign manager. Melanie Richer is a former communications director for the NDP. And Sherelle Evelyn is the managing editor of The Hill Times. Okay, so here we are. Rosemary, the dynamic has changed so much since January 6th when Justin Trudeau resigned. Here we are with the handshake of the Liberal leadership candidates, the four of them gathering there on that stage. It was a very friendly contest last night. Rosie, everybody was great and they agreed most of the time. What do you think we're going to see tonight in the English debate?
I mean, I don't think we will see any knockout punches. I don't think that's what anyone is going for here. I do think it would serve some of them to be a little less friendly. We're seeing it even now on the screen. And I'm not sure that helps people move their own goalposts, if you will. What we will see, though, is because they're all speaking in their mother tongue, in English, we'll see much more comfortable people, much more confident people, and people that can speak really, powerfully about their policy ideas. So I think that's a given. It will be a better debate because it's in English. And we'll see whether any of these people have the chops to take on the other players and leaders that we know.
Greg, as a resident Liberal, the dynamic from when this leadership contest was contemplated, when the Prime Minister announced his resignation, to now changed dramatically. 3 polls out today with the Liberals in first at 40%, with Mark Carney as the hypothetical leader in a Leger poll, 38 in Ipsos, 38 in Ecos, ahead of Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives. I mean, what do you make of where your party is going into this English debate tonight?
You mentioned dead cats and lots of bouncing.
Yes, a lot of dead cats.
I think we're kind of past that. I mean, look, Liberals have to be realistic here. This is the message that they were being told at least all through 2024, if not earlier, was that there are a lot of people that were, your potential vote, were very unhappy with you. And, were they parking somewhere else? Perhaps. And so I think that's the big lesson. The big lesson, I think, sorry, Rosemary, to push back on, you'd like to see that, people mix it up a bit more. And if it was somebody else's party, I might say the same thing. But I was chatting with Alex Ballingal from the Toronto Star, and I talked about this, that, before last night, the challenge would be, the history of debates where not just our party, but other parties, they show division, they sow division. And I heard Andrew McDougall, Stephen Harper's Director of Communications on the Arlene Bynon show this morning, and he referenced it. And it was the leadership debate with Ignatieff and Dion, and Ignatieff said, you didn't get it done. And Andrew talked about how the Conservatives very effectively used that line. So if anybody's going to mix it up tonight, I'd expect it to be Karina Gould. But I think the kind of the tunnel, vision on this is the fact that we're going to be in an election really, really soon. And what is the greater good in terms of, what they want to accomplish?
Yes, Fred, that was the you didn't get it done from Ignatieff. I think it's easy to make priorities and all of these things. It became a very difficult election for Mr. Dion. What are you watching for tonight as a Conservative? I mean, Mark Carney has his front-runner status. It is resonating in polls, whether it's solid or not, we'll see. What are you looking for tonight?
Looking to see who Mark Carney is. What is he going to come out and say tonight to introduce himself? Most Canadians like the idea of Mark Carney and what he represents and his resume, but they don't actually know him, and they doesn't know what his issues are and what his policies are. So this is an opportunity for him to come out and say what that is tonight, and we're going to be watching to see if he does that. How much does he distance himself or try to from this Trudeau government? Or is he going to be tied to them? This is all a love in last night. It's probably going to be similar, the same thing, which I think is problematic. I think if you want to be the candidate for change, which Canadians desperately want, you have to show that you're some kind of change.
So, Mel, do you need to distance yourself from the Justin Trudeau government or just not be Justin Trudeau? Because so far, that seems to be working for him.
Totally. That is a massive question. And I think it's a little bit hard to, obviously we're seeing the polls change, but it's still a potential thing. It's not a real thing yet. So I think that'll be to be seen when polls solidify. Will we have a lot of time before an election? It's hard to say. If we're going to go right in there, we're going to be in a campaign right away. What I find interesting about tonight is typically in a leadership, your members are paying attention. Real folks aren't paying attention, right? Canadians who don't consider themselves partisan aren't really paying attention during leadership races. But what's interesting about this one is you're obviously replacing a prime minister, and you're going right into an election campaign. So not only is this, Mark Carney's introduction to members, a lot of them, it's also an introduction to Canadians, and we're going right into that election. So how do you speak to both those audiences, which are very different, will be interesting tonight.
Cheryl, we watched this, and the candidates are sort of separated into tiers a little bit as this went on, and Carney does seem to be in a tier by himself going into tonight. If you look at the money, the endorsements, and the public polling, if Freeland and Gould or Baylis wants to get into that tier, what do they need to do tonight, do you think, in terms of that is different than what we saw in the French debate last evening?
Well, they have to agree less. I mean, if you're just propping up everything that Mark Carney is saying, then why would voters have any reason to vote for you if you were saying, oh yeah, this guy's got the right ideas? So that's going to be difficult. And I understand the desire to have, a bit of more of a everybody get along. We're not the party of division, those sorts of things. But you're asking people to vote for a prime minister, and in this environment that we're in right now, you have to be able to show that you have that kind of steel in your spine. And we haven't really seen that yet from the various candidates. We know that they have it. We've seen, people like Chrystia Freeland, like Karina Gould in Parliament stand up and, be very aggressive and very forceful. So at some point, they're going to have to go beyond saying, yes, vote for me, these are my ideas, and say, this is why I am better than this other person.
Yeah, and Rosie, this is the last big persuasion pitch to that 1% of the population, the 400,000 registered Liberals, and it really begins at next phase, certainly in English Canada, of reaching out to everybody else, right? Because the timelines, as Mel points out, probably going into a general election to sort of neuter the spending advantages the Conservatives would have outside of a writ period. I mean, what's your sense of how they had to balance that in terms of not doing enough to upset Liberals like Craig who don't want to see a fight, but then reaching out to people who may want to see a jolt from these people?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely two tracks happening throughout this whole leadership campaign. I think we would all agree here. I think I want to go back to a moment last night and see whether it happens again tonight, because I thought it was a very a stark contrast or a good moment. Chrystia Freeland obviously positioning herself as the one to take on Donald Trump. I've done all these things. I got him to do this. I got him to do that. And then Mark Carney said, and obviously all this was in French, yes, but that was the Donald Trump from before. That's not the Donald Trump now. And I thought that was a really powerful moment of contrast and a pretty decent line to push back on her experience with Trump, because Trump is more radical, more isolationist, more everything. And so it kind of neutered a little bit the advantage that I think she thinks she has in this race, given that it is so much about Donald Trump and it is so much what Canadians want to hear from these people here tonight. And even when the topic is not Canada-U.S. relations, they continue to bring it back to Donald Trump as much as they could. So that's I think, something that's going to be important to listen for. And I think it's something that not just Liberals want to hear. Canadians really want to hear from these people about how they're going to tackle that existential threat.
Greg, is wild, right? Because, all through 2024, when the Team Trudeau were looking for a life raft for his numbers, they kept talking about Donald Trump could change things. And he has, but not in a way that obviously benefits Justin Trudeau. It's just opened it up for this slate of candidates. I mean, I can't remember an event so catalyzing to just changing political opinion environment in a country like the election of Donald Trump this time around.
And to be clear, it's not about political expediency. I mean, I don't think anybody wants Donald Trump to be doing what he's doing in his own country, let alone what he's threatening to do to us. So yeah, I do think it's changed a lot. I will say, part of the pivot back, I had the benefit last week of being outside the Ottawa bubble back in our country, in Nova Scotia, small town Nova Scotia, and I can tell you, everyone is talking about this. In a town of 7,000 people, and I heard Conservative ads on the local radio station. Fred, nice work. But everyone is talking about trying. It doesn't matter. Every small business that you go into, and I think it's showing. I think I think about 4 million reasons. I think Mark Carney, from what I've hearing, has raised $4 million. He got into the race January 16th. And the Conservatives had an excellent quarter at the end of last year, 12 million. But between his day of declaration, which I think was January 16th, to today, that's about 5 weeks. That is a hell of a lot of money.
Yeah, and Fred, that's normally the type of money we see Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives associated with, not the Liberals. They've struggled to raise that as a party, and here he does this in a leadership. I mean, you're looking at it from your side, the polls are changing, dead cat bounce or not. There is a shift from like 25-point leads to no lead or 3-point leads. How do you calibrate this on the Conservative side of the equation?
Well, the game has changed. As we said, you said it was a major change with Trump. Of course, our biggest friend and trading partner, the United States, has basically declared an economic tariff war with us. That has shifted the entire game. Affordability and the cost of living crisis is still the #1 issue in terms of people's concerns, but this is speeding up significantly in that.
Well, it weighs into that, right? Tariffs make things more unaffordable and more difficult.
And
right?
now it's not just about the carbon tax, which is one way to fight it. It's now how do you tackle these tariffs and how do you protect the country from this? And that's going to have to be the focus of all the campaigns. Everyone has to recalibrate how they're doing this.
Mel, the NDP getting squeezed in this, it is the Bloc as well in Quebec, and we're a long way, and all polls are just potential. But when you're watching this tonight, I mean, we know the Conservatives are watching it and sending out rebuttals and getting ready to clip things for attack. What are New Democrats doing tonight, watching this particular debate and how it could affect things going forward?
Right, doing the same thing, right? So this morning I woke up to, here's what Karina Gould said that was attacks on Mark Carney, and she also thinks that Mark Carney's approach is the wrong approach. So pointing to those things and starting to frame the conversation. Again, pointing, if we're in an election right away, you're not going to have time to define the leader after the leadership race, so you need to start defining the leader now. And I think it's a lesson learned, particularly for Liberals and New Democrats, is we failed to do that with Pierre Poilievre, and Pierre Poilievre was able to totally redefine himself. So making sure that you don't make the same mistake. One thing too that, Fred, you talked about the change of game with everything happening with the U.S. I also think it's just a massive change of game with Trudeau resigning, right? Nobody thought he was going to. So the NDP, the Conservatives, everybody had kind of put a roadmap of here's how we're defining the next election, here's how we're defining the guy we're up against. Whereas now you're kind of caught in do people know who Mark Carney is? Is that maybe a gamble that they won't know who he is, so they won't want to vote for him? Or they do know who he is and they like him? That whole calculation, I think, is probably what's happening with the NDP. I know what's happening with the NDP and with the Conservatives too, of what does the game now look like with Trump, but also we're not up against Trudeau. So what does that look like?
Maybe, but I also think that the polls are actually better for Mr. Trudeau now too. If you look, I mean,
bizarrely,
obviously that's not a factor in hindsight and all the rest of it.
Totally.
But I continue to think that Donald Trump is the factor that has upended the political landscape to the point where Canadians looking at parties like the NDP and the Bloc are saying, not parking my vote there because that's not the direction I want to go.
Yeah, Sherelle, on that point, the contrast is no longer Poilievre, Trudeau, Singh Poilievre. It's Poilievre, Trump, Singh Trump, Blanchette Trump, Carney Trump, Freeland Trump, and that has changed the whole thing and forcing the other national parties to recalibrate as the Liberals seem to rejuvenate.
Yeah, but the interesting thing as well is that how do you then keep everything else from falling by the wayside? Because yes, everybody is so focused on Donald Trump and how do we beat Trump and who's the best foil for Donald Trump. And you look at the things that Donald Trump is doing in the United States and you say, okay, well, if we don't want to replicate that here, how do we make sure that various people in various groups and various marginalized communities aren't getting squeezed out? I mean, we saw it during the debate last night. We really only heard about, Indigenous peoples when they were talking about natural resource development. Frank Baylis was really the only one willing to talk about any sort of discrimination. So those are some of the things that I think, even though, yes, they're having this debate about, who's best for the country, who's best for the economy and all those other things. But if you're going to go right into a general, how do you speak to all of these other groups who are also looking for somewhere to park their vote?
Yeah. No, it's going to be an interesting balancing act going forward. But it's interesting that we were even at a point, as we're 30 seconds away, by the way, from the scheduled start of the English language debate for the Liberal leadership, but that we're even talking about a competitive environment when you consider where we ended 2024, when we started 2025, and here as we hurtle towards March of this year, There's an English language debate about to happen in Montreal, moderated by our former colleague, by the way, Hannah Thibedeau, who you will recognize from years at CBC News. It follows 4 themes: Canada's place in the world, growing a strong economy, supporting Canadians, and protecting the environment. Those are going to be the topics that the 4 candidates are going to discuss in a debate that happens in an environment that looks far more viable and far more competitive for the Liberal Party of Canada in a way that it has not looked really since about 2 years ago. And that's when you saw a divergence in the public opinion polls right after the Bank of Canada, Governor Tiff Macklem, ended the pause on interest rate hikes. You saw interest rates go up again. You saw Liberal fortunes fall. They never recovered, and Pierre Poilievre had a commanding lead. Tonight, those 4 candidates, Mark Carney, Chrystia Freeland, Frank Baylis, and Karina Gould, will debate in Montreal to decide who to make their case to become the next Liberal leader. And here it is with Hannah Thibedeau.
Language Liberal Leadership Debate here in Montreal. I'm Hannah Thibedeau, the Executive Communications Officer with Global Public Affairs. Tonight, I am very thankful to be moderating this debate. Tonight, our candidates, I'm going to introduce you. Karina Gould, on the left, Frank Baylis, Chrystia Freeland, and Mark Carney will tackle 4 key themes. And those themes were informed by registered Liberals across this country. I'm just going to remind you what those were. If you didn't watch the French language debate last night, you missed a lot. But tonight, I'm glad you're with us. It's Canada's place in the world, growing a strong economy, supporting Canadians, and of course, climate change. I want to welcome all of you to the debate this evening. I'm so happy to be here with you.
Great to be with you, Hannah.
So I'm going to explain to viewers a little bit about the format and remind everyone here too, because we go off a little bit. So here's the format. In each theme, there is an opportunity for candidates to answer a 1-minute question. They'll each get that 1 minute and the same question. Also in the themes, there will be opportunities for 5-minute debates, and we're going to have closing statements. Some of tonight's questions did come from registered Liberals. None of the candidates or their teams know what the questions are. They're in my head. They will come out. Let's start. I want to get right into this and begin with opening statements. And this order was decided by a random draw. Mr. Baylis, your 90 seconds starts right now.
Again. Good evening, everyone. My name is Frank Baylis, and I'm a professional engineer. As a businessman, I built several companies in the healthcare sector. And along with that, I've created thousands of good-paying, high-technology jobs. I know how to build strong teams. I know how to find good people and work with them to achieve results. I've also been elected as a member of Parliament from 2015 to 2019. So I have an understanding of how government works. Now, this combination of my private sector and my public sector experience puts me in a unique position to be able to build systems, work with the government, and make it work for all Canadians. Now, I recognize that we're living in challenging times, but having said that, I'm very optimistic about our future. Yes, I believe in Canadians and I believe in Canada, and with my plan, I'm certain we'll reach our full potential. I'm going to focus on 3 priorities. Number 1, I want to build a strong and resilient economy that we all benefit from. Number 2, I want to improve our healthcare system so that it becomes the best healthcare system in the world. And it's not going to cost more money, it's going to save money. And 3, I want to modernize the federal government such that it becomes much more efficacious, better at delivering services to our Canadian citizens. Together, we will build a proud and prosperous Canada for all Canadians.
Mr. Baylis, thank you kindly for that. Ms. Gould, your 90 seconds starts right now.
Meeting the moment. That's why we're here tonight. Growing up in a middle-class family in Burlington, Ontario, and now having 2 kids of my own, I get what Canadians are going through. Worrying about how to pay your mortgage, keep gas in the tank, or whether you'll be able to retire. I know it hasn't been easy, as we face serious challenges to our economy and to our sovereignty. But these challenges also present us with incredible opportunities to unite our country, defend our economy, and protect our values from the threats we are facing from south of the border and our own little version of Trump here at home. I got into politics to do good things for Canadians, and with a decade of experience, I know how to get that done. I am so proud to be Canadian, especially right now, as Canadians across this country meet the moment. And tonight, each of us on this stage need to meet the moment, Tonight, I am going to raise the tough questions we need to confront as Liberals, have an honest conversation about where we stand on the big issues we face as Canadians, and present a clear plan for the future of this country. If we do not do that, we will lose the next election. Our opponents may wish that Canada is broken, but we know as Liberals, this is a great country. Now is the time for hope. I am the leader we need, and together we can build the Canada we want, and I'm asking you to join me.
Ms. Gould, thank you kindly. Ms. Freeland, you're up next.
A few weeks ago in Saskatoon, I met a 4-year-old girl named Ari. She asked me, "Can you stop Trump from invading Canada?" Ari is a smart girl, and she's asking the right question. I'm running to be leader of the Liberal Party and the next Prime Minister of Canada because Trump is posing the gravest challenge our country has faced since the Second World War. He's threatening us with economic warfare. That's not new. Last time, he threatened to rip up NAFTA, and he imposed tariffs on our steel and aluminum. I fought back, and I won. This time, Trump's threats are even worse. He wants to make us the 51st state. Trump is unleashed and empowered. As your Prime Minister, I will be too. I have the experience, the plan, and the guts to stand up to Trump, to tell him that Canada is not for sale, and if he hits us, we'll hit him back. We need a leader who understands the seriousness of the challenge and is ready to meet it. A leader who can say to Ari and to everyone across our great country, "I will fight for you. I will fight for Canada. And together, we will win."
Ms. Freeland, thank you kindly. And we move now to Mark Carney.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mark Carney. I was born in the Northwest Territories, and I grew up in Edmonton. During my career, I've had the honor of serving our country, including as Governor of the Bank of Canada during the financial crisis of 2008. Right now, as my colleagues have said, Canada faces one of the most serious crises in our history. To get through it, we will need to build a strong economy, and that requires big changes. Canadians have been telling me that they want change. They want positive change that builds this country. I can bring that change. I know how to manage crises. I know how to build strong economies. Yes, there are a lot of uncertainties, but during a crisis, it's important to distinguish what you can't control and what we can control. We can't change Donald Trump, but we can control our economic destiny. We are masters in our own home. I have a plan that puts more money back in your pockets, a plan that makes our companies more competitive, a plan that builds a strong economy that works for you. Canadians are ready to stand up for their country. I'm ready to stand with them and bring the right change for Canada. Thank you.
Mr. Carney, thank you. Thank you all. And we're going to get right into our first theme of this evening, Canada's place in the world. So for all these 1-minute questions, you are all going to get that 1-minute chance to answer the same question. And that's where we're starting this evening. And here's a warm-up for you tonight because it comes from Deborah in British Columbia. But I think Deborah really is showing what many Canadians are asking right now. She asks, how will you stand up for Canada against U.S. President Donald Trump? But I would like to add to what she has to say, why are you the best person positioned to do this? And the order was picked ahead of time. And Mr. Baylis, you're first on this. 1 minute on the clock.
Thank you. So I've negotiated hundreds and hundreds of contracts with Americans over my 40-year career. And from time to time, I run into the character of Mr. Trump. So it's not new to me. On this point, I published a letter one day before his inauguration when I said clearly he's not going to put 25% tariffs on everything, but he is going to attack certain industries. The first one I said he's going to attack is steel. It's exactly what he did. I tell you this to tell you that I know how to deal with him. And it's important to understand that Mr. Trump is a bully. And you do not give 1 inch to a bully. In that case, we cannot be learning this on the job. That's where I come in. I have the experience and the expertise to deal with Donald Trump. I can predict what he'll do, and then I can help build our defenses to stop him from doing those things, and also counterattack, which unfortunately is going to be necessary. This way, I will protect our country, I will protect our economy, I will protect our culture, and I will protect our sovereignty.
Bang on time for the 1 minute. Appreciate that, Mr. Baylis. Mr. Carney, over to you now.
Thank you very much, Hannah. I think in a situation like this, you need experience in terms of crisis management. You need negotiating skills, but you also need economic expertise, because part of the way to deal with this situation is to do what we should have been doing and what we need to do as a country, which is to build a strong economy. Now, we're going to spend time on building a strong economy, so I'll go through my plan for that later. But let me start by being clear. We will never, ever be part of the United States in any way, shape, or form. We have to recognize that the Donald Trump of today is different than the Donald Trump of several years ago. Then his objective was to take more of our market. Now he wants to take our country. Let me finish by pointing out one other thing. Who's the worst person to stand up to Donald Trump? It's Pierre Poilievre. He worships the man. He uses his language. He's not the right person for our country at this crucial time.
Again, thank you for sticking to time on that. Ms. Gould, you're up now.
Thanks, Hannah, and thanks, Deborah, for the question. Look, men like Donald Trump have always underestimated leaders like me. But they underestimate me, and that's their mistake. And I think as Canadians, we know what that's like. We know how to stand up for who we are and to stand up to bullies. And that's something that I've been doing in the House of Commons for the last decade. I know how to stand up to people like Pierre Poilievre, who, when it comes to Donald Trump, would rather imitate him than stand up for Canada. I know how to stand up to people who want to take from us what is rightfully ours. We are a proud, sovereign country, and as Canadians, we have so much to offer, but also the Americans depend on us. And you can't bring a calculator to a knife fight. You have to fight very strongly and with the right tools, and that's exactly what I'm going to do as Prime Minister.
Ms. Gould, thank you kindly. We're going to move into our first 5-minute debate.
I think you forgot Chrystia.
Oh my gosh.
That's no
First
problem.
mistake by the moderator. My apologies. Ms. Freeland, thank you.
Thanks, Hannah. Trump represents the biggest threat our country has seen since the Second World War. I have recognized that from the outset. I've built my campaign on a plan to answer that threat. I do think, though, it is a big mistake for Canadians to think that because we can't change Trump, we can't negotiate with him. Of course we can't change him, but we can outwit him. And the way to do that is by using our leverage, by recognizing that, yes, we depend on the US, but they depend on us too. We are their largest market by far. We sell them the things we need. A smart, tough negotiator who stands up to Trump can activate those Americans who need us, get them to lobby him. That's how we get a win-win outcome. That's how Canada wins.
And now we will move into that first 5-minute debate. Thank you for pointing that out. This is an open debate. Mr. Baylis, we'll start first with you. Others can join in on this debate, but please try not to talk over each other too much. We will control that. So here's the question. Knowing the why is vital in negotiations, or you're essentially just negotiating against yourself. So why is President Trump doing this to Canada?
Well, President Trump needs to show that he has a win on the border. And he's got himself elected by saying he's going to deal with illegal immigration. And right away, he puts out a tweet saying there's a problem with Canada and Mexico. The problem is, for him, there is no problem with Canada. We know it, and the Americans know it. So he's trying to make one so that he can later solve it. Now, I want to point something out. This is not a negotiations. This is a shakedown. We have an agreement. He negotiated the agreement. He signed the agreement. The problem we have is he's not respecting the agreement.
So you believe it's the border, is what I feel for you.
I'm saying that that's his red herring, that he's trying to say we're a problem with the border that he's going to solve.
Ms. Freeland and then Mr. Carney.
Trump is starting with us for a very simple reason. If you can show the world that you can beat up on Canada your best friend, your reliable, trustworthy neighbor, then think about how the rest of the world feels. It is the demonstration effect. It is saying, if I can beat up on those guys, imagine what I can do to you. And that's why a smart Canadian strategy needs to start with looking for allies, working in the first instance with Mexico, Panama, Denmark, and the EU, who all face the same sovereignty challenge. I think we need to invite the Secretary General of NATO to that first summit that I will host right after becoming Prime Minister. Working with our allies, we form a common front and stop Trump from doing what he wants to do, which is pick us off one after the other.
Mr. Carney, you're up next.
I want to pick up on what Chrystia just said, because I think underlying all this is what President Trump is looking for is to dominate the hemisphere. He wants to enlarge U.S. power into Canada, into Greenland, into the Panama Canal, as was just mentioned. So the stakes are very, very high. This is a serious crisis, not just an economic crisis, it's a crisis of sovereignty. So yes, we do need to build our allies. But interests of time, I'm going to add one other thing, and we'll come back to this later. We also need to build our economy. We need to build our economy right here. If we have one Canadian economy instead of 13, that more than outweighs the impact of what he's trying to do to us.
So,
Ms. Gould? Go
yeah,
ahead.
thank you. And where, as I see where my colleagues are going, and I appreciate, I think all of that is probably true, except what did we just see in Ukraine? He did a deal with Putin for critical minerals in Ukraine. Who else has critical minerals? Canada. And so we need to understand what the U.S. is trying to do here, but we also need to make sure that we are standing up for our sovereignty and for our economy. You know, last night there was a bunch of conversations with colleagues who said, well, I'm not even going to talk to Donald Trump. Well, guess what? We don't have that choice. We have to talk to him. That is something that we absolutely have to do on behalf of Canadians. We might not like it, but that is the role of the Prime Minister, to stand up and fight for Canada every single day. And that is exactly what I am going to do. Stand up for Canadians, stand up for our industries, and to say that we have leverage, we have things the U.S. wants, and we're not afraid to use them. And if that means that Americans are going to see increased prices or American industries are going to suffer, we will make sure that we put everything on the table as Canada, because our sovereignty, our economy, our jobs are non-negotiable.
Okay. Mr. Baylis, let's try to go 30 more seconds because we have more interactions here.
Let me tell you the first thing I'm going to do. I'm going to go fly down and meet President Sheinbaum of Mexico. It's a very strong, smart lady. And I'm going to make a deal with her and say, look, we need to stand up together to Mr. Trump. He said he's putting 25% tariffs on both of us. He can't do that. It'll destroy his economy. So we need to call his bluff. And then what we need to do is take off the table what was already given for nothing, which is the work that we were going to do on our border for $1.3 billion and the work that she was going to do on her border, and say, you know what? That's off the table now. We're back to square zero. That's how I will deal with President Trump.
Okay. Mr. Carney, you want to jump in, and then Ms. Freeland?
Let me make 2 points. One is you have to be able to do more than one thing at one time as Prime Minister. So that means building the economy. It means negotiating with allies, leveraging our critical minerals, leveraging our clean energy with those allies. That's critically important. And hitting hard with a real negotiation with President Trump, which includes dollar-for-dollar tariffs, includes using all the cards potentially that we have, and they are considerable, as the U.S.'s largest client.
But yesterday,
let me get Ms. Freeland in first, and then just 1 second, Ms. Freeland, and then I'll come to you, Ms. Gould.
Recognize about President Trump is, with him, weakness is a provocation, and capitulation is not a negotiating strategy. The great thing is, right now, Canadians get it. There is this wave of patriotism in Canada, and Canadians are going to stand and fight for Canada. They need a leader who knows how to lead that fight and rally that wave of patriotism. I'm the leader who can do that.
Ms. Gould.
Thank you. Well, one thing that I would like to ask Mr. Carney, because yesterday he made some mentions of sectors that he would protect over others. And I think what is really important is to understand which sectors you're willing to protect, but which sectors you would negotiate away. And that is something that I think as Canadians we need to understand, because as Prime Minister, I'm not going to negotiate any of those sectors away. I'm going to stand up for people in every single province and territory, every single sector, to make sure that we protect Canadian jobs and protect our industries.
Okay, as moderator, all due respect, I'm going to try to ask the questions, but I am going to give Mr. Carney the opportunity to respond to that as well, Ms.
So
Gould.
let me be clear about a few things. One, not everyone would have watched the debate last night. So in a negotiation, if there are things that should never enter into the negotiation, language, culture, our water, you make clear at the start of the negotiation that they are off the table. Second thing is that the other aspects, for example, our auto sector, I'll give an example, which is intimately and interconnected with the United States. We're going to negotiate around maintaining a good deal for our auto sector. But that is not the same as accepting a bad deal, Karina.
Well, actually, when it comes to the auto sector,
10 seconds
in the
for-
previous NAFTA negotiation, we got a better deal than we had before. We changed the rules of origin for car parts that it gave an advantage to high-wage Canadian workers. That's the kind of approach we need to take.
Ms. Gould, do you want 10 seconds before we move on?
No, I'm okay.
Okay, we are going to move on then. Thank you. That was a great, fulsome debate. We're going to move on to the next section where it's a 1-minute response each for this question. So Donald Trump said again yesterday, I'm sure we all know, the 25% tariffs are coming on March the 4th. Only days later, one of you will become the Prime Minister of this country. What is your first move? And again, this was drawn ahead of time. And Mr. Baylis, your start.
So, first of all, I don't take him at his word. He said March 4th, but I would expect him to hit us beforehand, and I expect him to hit us again. What he's going to do is look at industries where he has overcapacity in the United States, because he'll be thinking that's going to hurt the American economy the least, I should say. So where I'm going to be looking at softwood lumber, and I'm going to be looking at dairy as the next two industries he's going to attack. And what we're going to be doing is supporting those industries completely. We're not going to let them take our jobs away. And we're going to be putting into place very intelligent counter tariffs. And then we're going to be waiting. And we're going to be waiting. Because he's not going to stop until he gets the lesson that he can't get away with this. Then what I am going to do is, as I said, I will go down and meet with President Sheinbaum of Mexico, come together with her and say, listen, let's hold the fort together. Let's call him on his 25% tariff bluff. Let's just call it. Tell him, do it. And let's take everything that he already took from us off the table.
Mr. Baylis, thank you. Ms. Freeland, you're up next. And again, days later, it's you that becomes Prime Minister. What is your first move?
My first move is dollar for dollar retaliation. And let me be very clear with President Trump. If I am Prime Minister, I will not flinch. We will retaliate. If you hit us, we will hit back. But our retaliation will be a lot smarter than their dumb tariffs. And it's the Wall Street Journal, usually a supporter of Trump, that described this Trump effort as dumb. Canada, by contrast, is going to be smart. We are going to have a targeted retaliation that exerts maximum pain in the U.S. and does minimum harm to us. We're going to hit Trump's best friends. I will impose a 100% tariff on Teslas. I'm going to hit Wisconsin dairy. I'm going to hit Florida orange juice. And you are going to see a stock market reaction. You're going to see people like the American Farm Bureau complaining about the Canadian potash they need that costs more. And that reaction, that pain, will cause Trump ultimately to back down, just like he did last time.
Ms. Gould, you're up next. Only days later, you become Prime Minister. What's your first move?
My very first move is to call a meeting with the Council of the Federation and bring the premiers together to make sure that we share our plan for Canada, because this is every single province and territory, every business leader in our country, every union leader, every single Canadian, and then to share the plan with the entire country, because Canadians deserve to know what we are doing. Absolutely, we retaliate against Donald Trump. We do a major Team Canada approach in the United States where we engage with American leaders, but also American citizens, because it is American citizens who are going to feel the impact of these tariffs, and we need to let them know that this is not Canada's decision, this is the decision of the United States. And I'm going to call on Canadians to stop going to Florida, to stop buying Florida orange juice, because that's a $50 billion economy in that state alone. Canadians matter to the United States.
Ms. Gould, thank you kindly. Mr. Carney, days later, you become Prime Minister. What's your first move?
Well, I'll pick up on a few things. First, entirely agree with what Karina just said. First item, I would call it a First Ministers meeting as opposed to a Council of Federations, but First Ministers meeting, sharing the plan, but also developing our broader response, our broader domestic response, including project. Secondly, entirely agree with Chrystia. Dollar for dollar tariffs, maximum impact on the United States, minimal impact here in Canada. Thirdly, put them on notice on the broader aspects of our commercial relationship. We are their largest supplier of energy. We are their largest supplier of electricity. We are their largest supplier of uranium. I could go on, but I will exhaust all my time. There is the first signs in the United States now of the economic impact of the Trump policies. We will amplify that, and that will begin to create the leverage. And then I will call President Trump.
And then you'll call President Trump.
Well, it's going to be a long day.
Okay, Mr. Carney, thank you. Ms. Gould, this is a 5-minute section, and I'm going to start with you on this. Others can jump in, again, if we can try not to talk over each other. Ms. Gould, what do you think Canada should be doing with our allies? And we did hear some discussion in the opening statements about this, given the shifting geopolitical sands around the globe.
Well, look, I mentioned that over the past week, Donald Trump has been negotiating away Ukraine's sovereignty and their territorial integrity. We saw President Trump abandon the free world throughout this process. We absolutely need to shore up our allies with democracies around the world because our democracy is under threat. We need to protect the values that we care about. What does that look like? It means reaching the 2% NATO target, not because the US asked us to, but because we need to as Canadians. It means making sure that we stand up for our values around the world, that we continue with our important international assistance. We saw Trump take away from USAID. Canada can't fill that void, but we can maintain our commitments. And it means making sure that we live our values on a daily basis on the international scene. The world needs Canada, and Canada will be there for the world.
Ms. Freeland?
It's a great question because what is different about this unleashed and empowered President Trump is he is clearly threatening our sovereignty, and we need to respond. For the first time, the U.S., rather than guaranteeing, for the first time since the Second World War, rather than guaranteeing the rules-based order, the U.S. is turning predator. And so what Canada needs to do is work closely with our democratic allies, our military allies. I've been foreign minister. I know how to do that. That's why I would start with our Nordic partners, specifically Denmark, which is also being threatened, and our European NATO allies. I would be sure that France and Britain were there, who possess nuclear weapons. And I would be working urgently with those partners to build a closer security relationship that guarantees our security in a time when the United States can be a threat. And I would also, crucially, reach out to our Asian democratic partners, Japan, South Korea, Australia. They need to be part of the conversation too. We need to be ready for a world where the US is not the leader of the free world anymore. Canada can be and must be a leader in building this new order. Our allies are looking to us. And if we do this, we'll make ourselves safer as well.
Mr. Baylis.
Yeah, thank you. So we're in a lucky position in the sense that Donald Trump has targeted many other countries, European Union, we've talked about the other ones as well. So we can use this to our advantage. Now we can say to them, let's get together and target Donald Trump and target some of his industries. I'll give you an example. So Boeing Airlines, they have to sell planes all around the world, and they have competitors that can also compete with them and sell planes we can buy from Embraer, we can buy from Airbus and that. So we should get together with them and say, look, we're going to bankrupt Boeing. The Canadian government should also do this. Under the same guise that he's using to impose these tariffs on us, we should say, you know what? It's an emergency situation, and we've got to relook at our defense spending, where we're buying planes from the United States, we're buying all kinds of defense industry products from the United States, and you know what? We're going to put them on hold for now, and if this continues for a couple more weeks, we're going to cancel them. We start this process, other people follow us, it will hit them exactly where it hurts.
Mr. Carney.
Well, it's interesting. I was asked a question a few weeks ago. I was in Amherst, Nova Scotia, and I was asked a question by some British journalists about whether the UK and Europe could avoid the impact of President Trump. And I said, good luck with that. Now they're beginning to see the impact. We've seen it through Ukraine and elsewhere. So there is an opportunity, in fact, a necessity, an imperative here, for us to work with like-minded countries on the new security architecture. Yes, we have to step up for our contribution. How we protect our Arctic, which is under threat not just now from the Russians and the Chinese, but from potential U.S. incursions. Serious, serious issue. We have to work on our, I'll call it our data architecture, how we're going to handle artificial intelligence. Last point, because a lot of people want to come in.
Yep.
We need to leverage all of our assets from critical minerals to clean energy and well beyond to harden those partnerships in Europe and in Asia with like-minded.
Ms. Gould.
Thank you, Hannah, and thank you to my colleagues, I think, for some very interesting ideas. Mark, you talked about reaching NATO targets, but of all of us on stage, you plan to reach those not until 2030, but the imperative to do that is now. You talked about the fact that the Arctic is under threat. We don't have time to wait for this. We have to actually make sure that we are investing here in Canada, reaching those targets, because our country, our sovereignty is under threat, and we are in a new world. And so the time to make those investments is now.
I do have a question about the targets coming up, so we will get to that. And just finally on this topic, Ms. Freeland.
I do believe we need to hit 2% by 2027, and we need to be focused on spending the money here in Canada with Canadian companies. But I want to be sharing a message from all of us directly with President Trump. What you are hearing from the Liberal Party of Canada is our sovereignty is not negotiable, Canada is not for sale. We are going to stand with all Canadians and not become the 51st state. And Pierre Poilievre wants to imitate you, but we are going to defeat him, and together we're going to fight for Canada.
So guess what? That question's coming up right now, Ms. Gould, so we can follow up. Mr. Carney, I'll give you the opportunity, because today the British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, announced 2.5% of their GDP for defense spending by 2027. Everybody has spoken about boosting our own GDP in different years, so we'll clarify with you. Would you do the same? 2.5% by 2027?
Well, look, the first thing, we're starting from a different position than the UK is. But it also goes to the heart of what we're trying to accomplish. I think this goes to a fundamental point about how to manage government. The outcome here is securing Canada to protect Canadians. Now, I was born in the Arctic, born in the Northwest Territories. I know it well. I know the imperative. The imperative in the Arctic is to have at least 2 new bases in the Arctic, probably Tuktoyaktuk and Inuktitut. We need to build out on NORAD. We need to build out cyber capabilities. We need to build out our frontier. The core point, I will spend defense dollars in Canada, not the 80% that this government has spent in the United States up until now. 80% of capital's defense dollars have gone to the United States. I will spend them in Canada, and I will spend them as rapidly as possible to secure for Canadians. But that is a management thing. It's not an arbitrary target.
Ms. Gould makes a good point, though. You had mentioned, I think, 2030.
I said by 2030.
Right.
And I said, when I said it, that we will do faster if we can deploy it faster in Canada. This is a management point. This is a core point about delivering security. And that is the issue, not just pushing money out the door.
1 minute for you, Ms. Freeland.
I think what it is about is will and a plan and commitment to defend our country. So I've put forward a plan to hit 2% by 2027. It is critical that we spend that money here in Canada on Canadian companies, and we need to be thinking about the next generation of warfare. As we're seeing in Ukraine, drones, AI, these are really important. Our 2% should not be about sending checks to the United States. Critically, we need a plan to defend our own borders, very particularly the Arctic, and we need to be working with our Nordic and EU, NATO partners. They have nuclear weapons. We need to say to them, we need a plan to protect and defend our shared Arctic without the US, and Canada will step up because it's our sovereignty that's at stake as well.
Mr. Baylis, you have 1 minute now.
Yeah, so about a year ago, I published a letter and said that we should meet our 2% GDP in defense spending and that we should do it by 2030. That was a 6-year time frame. And even at 6 years, to do it intelligently, it's actually quite compressed. So anybody can spend money and everybody can waste money. But to do it intelligently and such that it impacts and comes into Canada and we're buying Canadian products, Canadian services and that's not as easy. So I can't say that we would get to 2% in 3 or 4 years. I don't think that's doable in an intelligent way. There are some things we can do, which I did say, which is we should pay our armed forces much better. We're not doing that. We need to raise their pays, raise their benefits. Then I proposed something called CARD, which is the Canadian Agency for Advanced Research in Defense. And this is taking something that the Americans do, and they have their program called DARPA. So I'm copying that program where they invest in research and development in Canadian companies. They develop something, now we see it's working, then we can procure it. So I want to make the spending, but it won't happen that fast.
Okay, Ms. Gould, now over to you.
Thank you, Hannah. So, I mean, I think you hear from all of us that we want to increase our defense spending. It's just a matter of who's going to do it in the timely way that we need to do it. And I'm committed to doing it by 2027. And there are 2 ways that we can do this. First, by increasing the salaries of our Canadian Armed Forces. We do not pay our military personnel a sufficient wage in this country, and they are there for us when we need them most. And so we need to pay them more. That's something that I would do immediately as Prime Minister. Second, what can we do? You know, Mr. Carney talked about military procurement, but our military procurement isn't working. We have a lot of orders on the docket. We need a procurement czar to get those orders moving. And while I entirely agree with a Made in Canada solution, we need to ensure that our troops have the equipment, the tools, and the resources that they need to fight and protect us here at home and around the world.
Okay, this isn't a debate period, but I do see everybody wants to jump in. Ms. Freeland and then Mr. Carney.
I just want to push back against the idea that managerial or technocratic obstacles should get in the way of defending Canada. We really need to act with the fierce urgency of now. We need to recognize President Trump has said dozens of times he wants us to be the 51st state. I don't think any of us wants to be the leader who was asleep at the wheel and didn't get Canada defended, did not work with our democratic allies to protect our borders. They want to work with us. It's time for us to step up at home, to urgently reach out to them and build a new world order where democracy and Canadian sovereignty is protected.
Mr. Carney, you're up next.
I'm going to associate myself, I'm going to agree with that. The only amendment I'm going to make is, unfortunately, it won't be a world order. It will be a subset of the world order because the number of like-minded countries is much smaller with the U.S. exiting. But I want to make an important point because a huge element of securing Canada is going to be related to information warfare. It's going to be related to cyber. It's going to be related to artificial intelligence. And it's crucial that we're in Montreal. We're in one of the centers of artificial intelligence excellence. There are others in this country. It's crucial that we're building those capabilities on Canadian technologies, to Canadian values, to protect Canadians, because we can't rely on foreign suppliers for them. That is one of the new realities that are there. So the natural approach here is gone. And that's one of the main priorities I would have in terms of securing Canada.
Mr. Baylis, jump in there.
Yeah, so I would like to give you an example of how we can do this intelligently and how we can do it the wrong way. If we try and push tens and tens of billions of dollars out the door within 3 years for government procurement of defense, it's going to be wasted. It's going to be splashed all over the place, and we're not going to get what we need. The program that I'm calling for, CARD, Canadian Agency for Advanced Research and Defense, what we would do, I'll give you an example with respect to drones. Right here in Quebec, we have a very strong aerospace industry. So we would give out 5 or 6 research contracts, and none of this, by the way, is subject to our trade agreements, and see who comes up with the best drone. And once we have that, then we can go and say, we're going to buy that from you. But to develop it and get it done like that, that's not going to happen. So if we try to do this too quickly, we're going to be wasting money, and we're going to be wasting an excellent opportunity to build Canadian industry.
Ms. Gould. Thank you. I would push back gently on that to say that getting our troops the equipment and the supplies and the tools they need to defend Canada is not wasted money. It's actually imperative for them to defend and protect us in this time. But Mark brought up an interesting point about capabilities here in Canada. And as the Minister of Democratic Institutions, I put in place Canada's first ever and only plan to protect our country from cyber attacks in our democracy. And as part of that, I know that we have one of the premier cybersecurity institutions through the CSE here in Canada. But what we don't have is our own intelligence agency that can work to collect foreign intelligence. Now might be the time that we need to establish those capabilities. We heard earlier today that the Americans had thought about removing Canada from our Five Eye partnership. We rely too much on the Americans for intelligence internationally, and we need to ensure that Canada has the capacity and the capability to protect ourselves, to work with democratic partners, and to ensure, more than anything, we are protecting Canadians, Canadian industry, and our economy at a time of intense cyber espionage. And this is something that is an important policy for today in 2025.
Ms. Freeland, jump in there.
You know, I really believe in Canada and Canadians, and there is this wave of passion in our country to defend our country. One of the reasons that I decided to run for the leadership is I had a conversation after Trump made his 51st state threat with a couple of very brilliant young technologists who worked with Jeff Hinton, the Nobel Prize-winning father of AI. And they said to me, we know what's happening in Ukraine, and we see how technologists are leading the fight. We are patriotic Canadians. We believe in our country. We need a government that gets that invests in us, because we are ready to stand on guard for Canada. And that is the approach we need to take. I think we need to have confidence that Canadians, empowered and led by a government that believes in them, will do this.
Mr. Carney.
Okay. This is a crucial conversation. And I'm really heartened by both the seriousness, the range of ideas, but I'm going to bring up one related aspect, which Karina just touched on, which is about foreign interference in our democratic institutions. And the responsibility of all politicians, particularly leaders of parties, and certainly a prime minister, is to be fully briefed on these issues. Pierre Poilievre hasn't ever bothered to get his security clearance. I've already, during this leadership campaign, filled out my forms. It wasn't that hard to do, I have to say, and put them in, and I fully expect to get it in the near future. This is the kind of irresponsibility at a time when our country is under threat that we cannot afford. We cannot afford a leader like Pierre Poilievre.
Mr. Baylis?
I'd like to just do 2 things. First of all, clarification on Ms. Gould. I put out my defense plan before yours, and in it, I made it very clear that I was going to raise salaries, but that's not going to spend tens of billions of dollars. Having said that, what we do need to do is increase enrollment, and that will come by getting better salaries and benefits. And also, there's another area where I'd like to see a step up, where we've really fallen far behind. We're down to 33 UN peacekeepers in the world. This is not acceptable for Canada, the country that brought peacekeeping to the world. So I'd like to really invest in recruiting, strengthening the number of people in our armed forces, and putting some out in peacekeeping roles.
I want to thank you all. That was a great first theme. We are going to move on now to the second theme of this evening. And this is going to be a question for all of you. It's a 1-minute question. And I'm going to start with Mr. Carney this time. So Canadians are living in tough economic times. As Prime Minister, what would your priority be to strengthen our economy?
Well, I think I'll start my answer by saying this will be one of my top priorities, jointly with these issues that we just touched on, largely with the U.S. and the threats to our security. A focus on building our economy on several layers. First and foremost, this is a time to build. We have an enormous opportunity to build our economy. That means building millions of homes, We're millions of homes short in this country. Everyone who's trying to buy a home is aware of that, particularly young. It's building infrastructure, both conventional energy infrastructure and clean energy infrastructure. It's building up on the conversation we just had, on intelligence infrastructure. It is diversifying our trade partners with new trading routes, and it's creating one Canadian economy instead of 13. That's what's necessary to move this country forward from where we are today, which has become quite a weak position economically.
We will dig into some of those topics a bit more. Ms. Gould, you're up next.
Thanks. Thanks, Hannah. I think your question was actually about the cost of living for Canadians. It wasn't about, the macroeconomic picture, which we know is doing okay for Canada. But when Canadians, people, don't feel like that, it's not working for them. I'm glad to hear, my colleague talk about housing. It's one of the first times I've heard him talk about it during this campaign. I put out a very bold, ambitious plan on housing that would eliminate homelessness, that would build millions of homes, and that would help first-time homebuyers get into the market. I've proposed a 1% GST tax cut from 5% to 4% to help Canadians with the immediate cost of everything. And I've put forward a plan to modernize our social safety net and put us on a path towards a basic income. Canadians are struggling. We need to help them make ends meet. That's what leadership looks like, and that's what the economy means to me. It's about people.
Ms. Gould, thank you. Mr. Baylis, you're up for a minute.
Yes, I put together a plan, an economic plan. I call it my prosperity plan, and I'm going to bring fiscal discipline to Ottawa. And yes, we're going to have to stop running deficits. It has a direct impact on the value of our dollar, and that has a direct impact on affordability. So I will not be cutting the GST. I'm going to modernize our healthcare system to get it to do a lot better with less. That's our biggest spend for provinces, our biggest transfer from the federal government. I'm going to increase productivity. This is something I know from my work in business, but it's something as well that I'm going to bring to government. And also, I'm going to do a lot of procurement as much as possible within our trade rules from Canadian companies. Together, this is going to put us on the right path. Now, people say, what date? What date, Frank, are you going to end deficits? I can't give you a date, but what I can say is this. We're going to stop going down this pathway, and we're going to start going down this pathway of budgetary balanced budgets. And this is going to raise our dollar, and that'll be better for everyone in the long run.
Okay, and 1 minute now to Ms. Freeland.
All economic plans today have to start with an effective response to President Trump. He is the biggest economic menace our country and Canadians are facing. I have a plan to make us united, strong, and smart, and to win. I think we also all recognize that President Trump is also handing us a golden opportunity. Canadians right now really get how wonderful Canada is, and they understand we're under threat. And so today we have a chance, a once-in-a-generation chance, to make Canada stronger, richer, more prosperous, more resilient. I'm going to seize that opportunity. I'm going to cut interprovincial trade barriers. I'm going to cut red tape and get things built. I'm going to use government procurement not to send checks to the US, but to invest in Canadian jobs and Canadian companies. That's how we make Canada stronger, more resilient. That's how we stand up to President Trump.
We are going to move into the 5-minute section, so I'm just going to lead off with a question, but I'm sure you may have things you want to jump in on each candidate. Mr. Carney, you will start this 5-minute debate. Others can jump in. Last year in Canada, there were over 2 million visits to food banks. That's the highest in our history. For people who are at home, how would you make it more affordable for them?
Okay. I would like to come back to some of the points raised, but this is such an important issue. I'll go straight to affordability. What's happened in this economy over the last 5 years is that people's wages have not kept up with the rise in prices. So we've had the average family of four, their food basket has gone up by more than 25%. Their wages haven't kept pace with that. So, and we see the growth in food banks, but we see every day middle-class families struggling as a consequence of it. So a huge range of things need to be done to improve affordability. And let me list some of those because they're crucial. The first thing is my government will make a middle-class tax cut. Secondly, my government will remove, as Ms. Freeland will, remove the GST for first-time home buyers. This is a crucial point, getting on the home ladder. We need to, if we have one Canadian economy, we can reduce prices by 15%. If we have greater competition in our economy, which my government will deliver, in groceries, in broadband, in transportation, that will bring prices down. That will help people move ahead. So we have to tackle the affordability issue across the board. Last point, absolutely have to keep in place the progress that the government has made on crucial things such as childcare, on dental care, and farmer care, because that helps those who are most vulnerable.
We'll talk a little bit about healthcare soon, too. Ms. Gould, you're up next.
Thank you, Hannah. You know, when my colleagues talk about households, I talk about families. When they talk about, you know, the macro picture, I talk about what it means for individuals. And I'm so proud that I was able to deliver affordable childcare for families across this country. And I would expand that to include before and after school care as well. But when we're talking about people who are going to food banks, we're talking about the most vulnerable in our society. A middle-class tax cut or removing the GST on new homes isn't going to help those folks. But you know what will? Modernizing our social safety net, making sure that seniors who live on a fixed income, persons with disabilities, folks who have lost their job, who need support to retrain and rebound, are better off. And that's why I'm talking about opening a path towards a basic income. Poverty costs money. That's why we need to work to eliminate homelessness. It's why I would work with provinces and territories to have specific accords to ensure that folks who get into housing can stay stable and that they can enter the workforce and join and be prosperous. We need to tackle poverty in this country. It is urgent for us to do, and it is something that I am promising that I will work on with Canadians to ensure that every person in this country has a real, viable opportunity for success.
Ms. Freeland, you're up next.
I am so glad to have childcare mentioned. As finance minister, one of the things I was so grateful to be able to do was to introduce in my first budget a national system of early learning and childcare. And it was wonderful to work first with Ahmed Hussein, get that first crucial deal with BC and a bunch more. And then Ahmed handed the baton to Karina, and we worked together. This is generational. It's transformational for Canada. My affordability plan includes 100,000 more childcare places. It includes a middle-class tax cut. It includes a cut on credit card fees. It includes a cut on taxes for first-time home buyers. And the critical thing for us to all remember is the real threat to Canadian families, the real threat to people working really hard and struggling to get by is not anyone on this stage. It is Pierre Poilievre. He will cut. He will bring in a cruel austerity that will hurt all the people in Canada who need the help the most. And that's why I'm proud to be a Liberal, and that's why I'm running to be the next leader of our party.
Mr. Baylis, I'm trying to pick up some time here. 30 seconds to you, and then I'm going to come over to you, Mr.
So you mentioned food banks. I've actually been on the board of directors of a food bank for 11 years. And you'll note that I was over the time that I was a member of parliament. So normally I stepped off all boards because you don't want to politicize them. But the food bank said, Frank, we don't care. We need your help. Please stay on the board. So I understand this intimately. Now, what tends to happen with politicians, they did it this time. They brought the grocery store owners in and they yelled at them and screamed at them. But the reality is this. If you want to buy an orange, that grocery store has to go buy it in the United States in US dollars, bring it to Canada, convert it to Canadian dollars. Every time our dollar goes down, that price of that orange goes up. Now, if we want to get that down, working, we need to bring our dollar up and bring oranges, bananas, everything else down. That's the solution.
Mr. Carney?
I want to be clear, and Canadians feel this. I want to be clear about the, quote, strength of our economy. Mm-hmm. Our economy over the last 5 years has been driven by a big increase in the labor force, which was largely because of a surge in immigration that is now trying to be controlled, and by government spending that grew over 9% year after year after year, twice the rate of growth of our economy. Okay? So our economy was weak before we got to the point of these threats from President Trump. That's why we need big changes. That's the reason I'm here. That's why we need big changes to how we're managing this economy. I want to make one last point, which goes to workers. My plan, it's a time to build across this economy. We can go into more detail. It is going to be a great time going forward to be a worker in Canada. It is going to be a great time to be in the trades in Canada because we are going to build this country across this country for Canadians and with Canadians.
Ms. Gould, I'm going to give you 30 seconds. We are out of time, but I want to...
Look, I'm not going to talk down Canada. I am only ever going to be a champion for this country. And when it comes to the question that was asked about poverty, we actually have to talk about people in poverty and what their lived experience is. When I was the Minister of Families, I worked on a national school food program that is now going to be supporting thousands of kids across this country and delivered childcare. But let's be clear, poverty costs us money, and investing to tackle and end poverty, like things like the Canada Child Benefit or increasing senior supports, is going to benefit all of us.
Okay, and 30 seconds to you, Ms. Freeland, and then we'll move on.
I just want to say really quickly that we need to be really careful not to repeat conservative talking points. Canada most definitely is not broken. We are a strong, resilient country. Canadians live 4 years longer than Americans, and median wealth in Canada is higher than in the US. Trump is giving us an opportunity to make a strong economy even stronger and more resilient. And I think as Liberals, we have to remember the great legacy of Jean Chrétien and Paul Martin. We are the party that believes in social policy and economic policy. We know how to deliver jobs and growth, and we know how to support people. We believe in both, and that is the kind of party and that is the kind of government I will lead as Prime Minister.
We're going to have one more 1 minute issue, and we can talk about all of the other stuff in that as well. So I'm going to start, this is supposed to be with Ms. Freeland as well on this one because it was previously drawn. As Prime Minister, and we're coming back to what we were talking about when it comes to managing the nation's books, how would you manage the nation's books at this critical time? And of course, you were the former finance minister.
Yeah, well, I would start by pushing back very forcefully against Conservatives who talk Canada down. The reality is Canada has a strong fiscal position. We have a AAA credit rating, and we have the lowest debt and the lowest deficit in the G7. That was important for me to maintain a fiscally responsible position because I know that we have needed to keep our fiscal firepower dry because I saw that Trump was coming. Today, we need to seize the opportunity that Trump presents us to harness this wave of Canadian patriotism and to build a Canadian economy which is even stronger with more jobs, more investment, more prosperity. And critically, we need to remember that standing up to Trump is the foundation of all economic policies, and there could be some pain involved. The government has to be there to support workers, to support businesses. As Prime Minister, you have my commitment that I'll do that.
Mr. Baylis, your 1 minute starts now.
So as I mentioned, I'm going to bring fiscal discipline to Ottawa. Now, when I say that, a lot of people think, okay, is he going to cut services or is he going to raise taxes? It's neither. There's a third option, which is to increase productivity. So if we increase productivity, we increase richness, we increase our tax base and everything. Now, as a business owner, I've done that. When I brought a company from 2 people to 1,000, I know how to invest intelligently to increase productivity. Added to that, as I mentioned, I've also been elected. So I'm the one person here that understands both sides of the coin. And I'm going to use that skill set to then say, okay, how do we put in place government programs that are going to help the economy work, government programs that are going to be à la bénéfice, to the benefit of businesses, and take away ones that are hurting, such as, for example, I wrote well over a year ago that the increase in capital gains was a very bad idea because it goes against what we want. It discourages investments when we want to encourage them.
Ms. Gould, you're up next.
Thank you, Hannah. Look, I'm all for increasing productivity. And in fact, last week, I announced a plan to create 1 million new entrepreneurs in this country. I'm the daughter of a small business owner. I grew up working in the family business, and I think we need to unleash that economic potential. But if someone tells you that they're going to balance the books in a very short period of time, increasing our productivity in that period of time is not going to be sufficient. And at a time when we are facing potentially one of the greatest economic shocks our country has experienced, we need to ensure that the government can be there for Canadians, like the federal government was during the pandemic with the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, the business loan, as well as the wage subsidy, because we will win against Donald Trump. But we need to ensure that Canadians have the income support they need and the jobs to get to when we eventually win. Thank you.
Mr. Carney, the last in the 1 minute.
Okay. Well, it was my privilege to work with Paul Martin when he balanced the books and kept the books balanced. And one of the lessons of that is the need for government to continue to focus on how effective it is spending precious taxpayers' dollars. In other words, a focus on the outcomes of programs as opposed to the dollars going in. And one thing you can see is that the scale of increase in spending and the scale of increase in the public service hasn't been matched by greater productivity in certain areas. So the focus does have to go to that in order to create the room and maintain the room for those social programs, because that is what the Liberal Party is about. One of the core things, which is to manage responsibly our fiscal position so that we can support the vulnerable in society, so we can move forward as a society. So we need to spend less and invest more as a country.
We're going to move into a 6-minute debate on this. Yes, because this is something we want to continue to discuss. Ms. Freeland, I'll go to you first on this one. Productivity seems to be sort of a sleeper issue. When you mention it to Canadians, they go, How will you fix productivity in this country?
Well, I think that President Trump is giving us this golden opportunity to fix some of the long-standing, well-known obstacles to Canada being more productive. Interprovincial trade is the standout example, and we now have the will to do it. Recognizing foreign credentials of people who are already here, you know, that famous person we all know who is driving a taxi but is a nurse or a doctor, that's another example. Another one is just cutting red tape to get big projects built. But we're coming to the end of the economic section, and I do want to talk about a part of the economy where there have been huge leaps in productivity, which is central to Canada's resilience and economic strength, particularly as we face up to Donald Trump, and that is rural Canada and our farmers. I am the daughter of a farmer. I grew up on a farm. There are no people in Canada or the world who work harder than farmers. And I do think it's really important for us to have government policies that support our farmers. They give us food security. They are an important source of strength when it comes to this standoff with the U.S. And we need to be very clear with Canada's dairy farmers that we will stand for supply management. I mean, isn't it a good thing that we produce our own milk, our own eggs, our own butter, our own cheese, that we're not dependent on U.S. factory farms for that? So we need to remember and stand with our farmers.
Ms. Gould, you're next, please.
Thank you, Hannah. Look, Chrystia, I'm really glad you mentioned the rural economy and agriculture. One of the first things I would do as Prime Minister in my speech from the throne is to ensure that we protect supply management. It was a piece of legislation that unfortunately died when we prorogued Parliament, but I think it is imperative that we protect our supply managed sectors. But I think one of the frustrations that rural Canada has had with us as a government is that we haven't spoken enough about sectors in rural Canada, whether that is mining, whether that is energy, whether that is agriculture, whether that is forestry. And for us, we have to really ensure that when we talk about productivity, we're not just talking about new sectors, we're talking about existing sectors. And this is where AI can be used as a tool to enhance productivity in those sectors. And that's something that I'm really excited about. But One thing that I do want to mention, and Mark, I'm glad you talked about Paul Martin, because I know you were a really excellent Deputy Minister of Finance who did really good work, is that we also need to remember that the economy is about people. It's not just numbers or points on a graph. It's about how do we make the economy work for people. And Hannah, your question about productivity, what does that mean to the average Canadian when they're saying, I can't afford my groceries and I'm having a hard time paying my rent? We need to talk about the things that matter to Canadians, not because we're talking as politicians, but because we're talking as people who understand and experience what they're going through.
Okay.
And that's something that I bring to the table.
Okay, I'm going to have to stick to time on this topic. Mr. Baylis, you wanted to jump in on that, and then Mr. Carney after that.
So when we talk about productivity, one of the first places I'm going to look at is the federal government itself. That's when I talked about modernizing the federal government, one of my 3 priorities. I'll give you an example here. Revenue Canada is the biggest pain point for both individuals and businesses in trying to pay their taxes. This is ridiculous. This is such a waste of time, and that wasted time directly impacts their productivity. So I'm going to fix Revenue Canada. I'm going to get it working the way it should work, because the people that are calling and trying to work with Revenue Canada are good people. They're trying to pay their taxes. Other things I'm going to do, I'm going to build 2 pipelines, 2 gas pipelines to get our great Alberta natural gas to the East Coast and the West Coast. That's going to have a huge impact on our economy. It's going to diversify us away from reliance just on the Americans. And yes, it's going to have a very positive impact on the world's environmental situation, because it allow our Asian and our European allies to come off of coal and oil and start using a much cleaner fuel, liquid natural gas from Alberta.
Mark Carney.
Okay, one of the reasons why families have a hard time to afford their groceries is because we haven't had productivity. That's the issue. It's that their wages aren't keeping pace with prices. That's because they're not being given the right tools to work with. We're not working as smart as we should. So that's the challenge that we're talking about. And that's the result, and that's the connection. As Prime Minister, you need to make the connection between policies that make that difference that go to families. So both are connected. A couple quick points. Number one Canadian economy will drive huge productivity. Secondly, productivity in government, as Frank just says, I won't go on about it, but it's absolutely essential. We have not had the productivity we need in government. Thirdly, the 2 big drivers of productivity going forward will be the energy transition and AI.
Okay, I'm going to give you each 15 seconds. Ms. Freeland, with you first.
Making Canada more productive, which just really means making us all more prosperous, means we have to invest in infrastructure. Yeah. We have to invest in physical infrastructure. That's why I'm so supportive of high-speed rail. We also have to invest in social infrastructure. That is infrastructure too. And early learning and childcare is such a great example, because this is a policy which makes life more affordable for families. It makes kids smarter because it's so high quality, and it adds to the labor force without requiring any new homes. So physical infrastructure, social infrastructure, and we have the national will to really do this, because we know we need to be more resilient, because we're at this critical moment for our country, facing the need to stand up to Trump and defend our sovereignty and our economy.
That was not 15 seconds, but we'll try again. Karina Gould, 15 seconds for you, and then I am going to give Mr. Baylis 15 as well.
The job of Prime Minister is to connect with Canadians, and it's to ensure that you are placing the priorities of Canadians at the center of everything that you do. That's why tackling things like homelessness and housing affordability actually make people's lives more affordable. That's the job of being a politician. It's putting the human face on policy.
Mr. Baylis, 15 seconds.
So with respect to productivity, I'm one of those people that says, what's best practices? Now, one of the leaders in productivity in the world is Ireland, and they have a very clear axiom of belief: capital gains should be lower, because it encourages investments. Whether you're on the right or the left of the spectrum, they all know that. They keep their capital gains tax very low, and that encourages the investments that they need for productivity.
Literally 5 seconds, Mr. Carney.
It's time to build. We should support builders, and those are people who take risk for our country.
Okay, we are going to move on to our third theme this evening. I want to thank you for that last one. It was a really good debate. And we're going to start with you, Ms. Gould, on this one. This is a 1 minute, so each of you are going to get 1 minute to respond to this. In 2015, Justin Trudeau swept to power in large part because young Canadians, they liked him, they voted for him, but fast forward to today, that age group is really moving towards the right. What will you do as Prime Minister to win back the support of that age group?
Thanks, Hannah. Well, maybe the debate so far is indicative of why young people are not supporting the Liberals right now, because we're not talking about the issues that matter to them. We talked a little bit about housing, but that's one of the biggest challenges that young people are facing right now. My plan to really supercharge our housing investments, but also to ensure that young people can actually enter the housing market will make a difference in that regard. We're not talking about the cost of living, on how challenging it is to be a young person these days, and the dream of owning a home or having that prosperity that's just not there. And if I can be honest, one of the things that we did was we lost trust of younger people because we weren't focused on the issues that mattered to them. And so my pledge as Prime Minister is to ensure that I am building a future for you as young people and for future generations.
Thank you, Ms. Gould. Frank Baylis, you're up next.
So for young people, there's a few things that are critically important. First of all, let's talk about education. We've done something very silly. By the way, my 1 minute is not on. Should it be on?
I'll keep track.
Okay, sorry about that. So,
That was very honest.
yeah.
There we go.
There we go.
And you'll get those extra seconds.
No problem. So what I was going to say is that, first of all, I want to see real investments in our universities. We've been squeezing our universities, and quite frankly, that's the dumbest thing we should be doing, because that's the foundation of an advanced economy. So I want young people to know that I will be completely supporting your education. Second thing is, they are the ones that are going to find it hardest to buy a home. So we need to help them buy a home. And there's two things we can do. Well, there's many things, but two things that I'm proposing is to increase the amount for the first home savings account. It hasn't kept up with inflation and that, so we need to increase the amount of money that people can put aside so they can buy a home. And the second thing we need to do is really keep the investments going, which have been lacking for so long, in social housing. The government's got out of social housing, and there's a knock-on effect that affects everybody when that happens. So we need to get back into social housing. We need to help young people buy their homes. And what we need to do, when I get the government in order, what will happen is you'll have more money in your pocket. It'll take a little bit of time, but you will be able to buy a home.
Ms. Freeland, your 1 minute is now.
Well, I was there in 2015. I had been a backbench MP for 2 years, and I remember how electric that campaign was. And the reason we won, at the heart of it, was we recognized the pain that middle-class Canadians, including young Canadians, were feeling. And we recognized and identified that Stephen Harper led a lackluster recovery from the 2008 financial crisis. We pointed that out, and we said we are going to invest for jobs and growth. Today, we need to do the same thing, and we need to focus on affordability for young people. I have a plan to do that. Cut taxes for first-time homebuyers. Cut taxes for the middle class. 100,000 new childcare places. Cap credit card fees. We need to be there for young Canadians so that they can know if they work hard, study hard in the free trade schools I will offer them, they can have a great Canadian middle-class life.
Mr. Carney, you're next.
Okay. Are we going to talk about housing?
We're getting there.
Okay, good. Because housing is central to this, but I want to add to the opportunity set for younger Canadians, which has shrunk in recent years. Let's expand it. Let's expand it in all aspects of what we're doing. First and foremost, it's a time to build, as Ms. Freeland just said, focus on infrastructure, building this economy out. There is a huge range of opportunities that comes. As I say, for the next 25 years, being in the trades, fantastic if we follow through with the promise there. That's the first. The second is, as Mr. Baylis said, let's look at our universities. Their funding is being squeezed and has been squeezed, and it's been made up by having foreign students. That's come to an end. We need to be there for our universities, or we're going to miss the opportunity. Thirdly, we need broad-based skills training. The federal government has a role there. We need to leverage AI and others to deliver it.
Okay, we are going into a 5-minute debate now. And Ms. Gould, I'm going to start with you again on this one. This is from a Liberal in Ontario, Carissa. She's asked the question in this survey, how do you plan to make owning a home, and there comes the question about home ownership, feel like a possibility to those stuck in renter's land?
Thank you, Carissa, for that question. So there are two parts of my comprehensive plan on housing. One, create an industrial housing strategy so that we can build millions of new homes. We can use modular homes. We can invest in co-op housing, but also to increase the first-time home buyers incentive. Right now, it's about 5 to 10%. I want to increase that to 50% so that first-time home buyers can actually get into the mortgage, into the market, build equity, and buy back that equity over time. But I want to pick up quickly on the last question because I was actually a young person in 2015. And I was excited about what the Liberal Party of Canada was offering, and I was excited about Justin Trudeau's leadership. And you know why? Because it was a bold, ambitious plan for our country. It was progressive. We were going to fight. We fought climate change. We talked about new ideas to move this country forward. And the way that we're going to bring young people back to the party is not by being conservative light and not by being unambitious for Canada. It's going to be by having bold ideas for this country where Canadians feel inspired and hopeful about the future that we're going to have. That's what young people are looking for. They're looking for a hopeful future where those opportunities exist. And, you know, I'm not quite still a young person, although I'm younger. You know, it's that energy, that drive, that optimism for the future that is going to build the best country in the world.
Ms. Freeland, you're up next, please.
So first of all, I want to say, Carissa, thank you very much for being involved and for asking that question. I hear that question from so many younger people who are just frustrated that they're worried that they've lost out on getting into the housing market and maybe the kind of life that their parents had is not going to be available to them. It is absolutely essential for us as a country that we say, we're not going to let that happen. And if young Canadians work hard, have a good job, studied hard, and they want to own a home, we have to make that dream of home ownership achievable. I have a plan to do it. It starts with cutting taxes for first-time home buyers to give them a leg up in the housing market. I'm so glad to hear so many people mentioning the first home savings account. I introduced that as finance minister. I think it is a great way for young people to save for that first home, and I would increase the amount of money that people can put in that first home savings account. Free trade school is going to help people get that first home too, because it will mean there are more skilled tradespeople to build those first homes people need. And then finally, I just want to say, some people are going to want to buy their own home. Some people want to live in affordable housing or maybe a co-op. I lived in a co-op. One of my aunts still lives in the co-op she and my mom helped build. There is, though, someone in Canada who does not believe in affordable housing, who does not believe in co-ops. Pierre Poilievre has actually called them Soviet-style housing. And so we all need to be very, very clear. We must defeat him because some Canadians need affordable housing too.
Mr. Baylis, you're up next.
So I feel for these young people. When I look at the house prices, I shake my head and think, my gosh, when I was buying a house, I thought it was hard. And it was my first home was $195,000. It's almost shameful to say that now. But back then, buying a home was about 4 times your salary, your annual salary. It's gone up to now 10 times your salary. So what are we going to do about that? Well, we're not going to bring house prices down again. So we need to get your salaries up, and we need to get more money in your pocket, and we need to bring the cost of living back in line. So what I'm proposing to do is there's a number of technical issues, which I've listed on my website, but in a general sense, I would say to young people, start saving. If I become Prime Minister, I'll get to work on the economy. I'll create the good jobs that you need, just like I've done in my own businesses. You'll have more money in your pockets, and we'll get the cost of living under control. And in a few years, with the home saving plans and that, you will be able to buy a house. So please do not lose hope on that.
Okay, Mr. Carney, I'm going to end this segment on you, please.
Okay, so we need to double the rate of home building in this country. That 10 times salary point, we need to double the rate in order to even have the places for those people. We obviously need to get those incomes up at the same time. So there's two questions here. How do we get the rate of home building going from 250,000 a year to 500,000? We're going to need changes to how we build homes, much more technology, much more modular homes. We're going to need a big surge, as was just mentioned, in tradespeople who can build those homes. We're going to need to cut the fees in municipalities for developers. The federal government has a role to play there. We have a housing accelerator fund that's working. I would supercharge that as part of this. And then on the other side of the equation, we need to make it more affordable, particularly for young people, to buy those homes. Now, removing GST on first-time home purchases, that's 5% off the home, which is a substantial proportion of the down payment. There's other financing mechanisms that come with that. But in the end, and let me finish on this, this will come back to our ability to build a strong economy. It's not just building the homes, it's building the strong economy so people can catch up.
We're going to move on to our next segment. It's not the segment, another theme, but this is an important topic. Canadians are worried they can't access a doctor or a nurse. What would you do as Prime Minister, working with the provinces, of course, because it is provincial jurisdiction, and territories to help solve this issue? And Mr. Carney, you are up first on this one.
Well, this is a crucial issue. Across the country, virtually without exception, in fact, I would say without exception, access to a doctor, in many cases access to a healthcare professional, is not possible. Healthcare is a right in Canada. We are not living up to our commitments. And this is not as simple as saying, I'm not saying you implied this, that it's a provincial jurisdiction. So first and foremost, we have to meet our responsibilities as the federal government in terms of the healthcare transfers, but we have to do a lot more. We have to make sure, and we should be part of this, that healthcare professionals can move across this country as readily. So a nurse in Quebec can go to Alberta, can go to Northwest Territories and practice immediately. We have to make it easier for foreign health professionals to work more rapidly. We have to increase productivity in the health sector. Mr. Baylis has ideas on that, including on portable data, portable health records, which are crucial, but a broader use of AI, and us, last point, us as the federal government, accelerating those changes to deliver what Canadians deserve as Canadians, and we're nowhere close yet.
Ms. Gould, you have 1 minute on the clock now.
Thank you. My goodness. I mean, this is something that every Canadian has experienced. Yeah. The anxiety of not being able to have a family doctor, or worried, and what we're seeing across the country is emergency rooms that are closed or that are understaffed, and hallway medicine. This is absolutely a provincial jurisdiction, but the federal government has an important role to play in two regards. When it comes to health transfers, we need greater accountability from provinces, not to the federal government, but to their own citizens on the outcomes and the outcomes that they expect to deliver for their citizens. And then when the federal government can do is convene provinces and territories and colleges to ensure that our healthcare workers can travel across the country, but we also expeditiously can recognize foreign-trained doctors and healthcare professionals so that every Canadian has access to a family doctor and the medical specialist that they need when they need it.
Mr. Baylis, your 1 minute is on the clock.
So I've spent 40 years of my career in the healthcare industry, and I can give you examples where I've walked through emergency rooms, down the hallways, and I've seen people in gurneys up and down there, and it's broken my heart. So I'm absolutely committed to fixing the healthcare system. What we need is a change in paradigm. Our system was designed in the 1960s when the population in general was younger, and it was designed for acute care. Now we have a chronic care problem. So we need to redesign our system to treat chronic care. Presently, there's only 2 doorways into the system. If you're lucky, you have a family doctor, and if you're not, what do they tell you to do? Go to the emergency room. So what I want to do is open 3 more doors into the system. I want to go to pharmacists, first of all, and expand their scope of practice. They can do so much. I want them to do a lot more, which they're trained to do. Number 2, I want to train 6,000 nurses to become what we call nurse practitioners. That would allow them to do almost as much as a doctor and have them staffed across the country. And finally, I want to invest in home care.
And Ms. Freeland, 1 minute for you as well.
Well, thank you, Hannah. And I want to start by thanking the great, hardworking people in the Canadian healthcare system. A few days ago, I spoke to a nurse practitioner. Her name was Kathy in Riding Mountain. Hi, Kathy. I hope you're listening. She's a Liberal. And she talked to me about how much she loves her job and cares for her patients, but how much of a strain the strain on the healthcare system imposes on her, too. So thank you very much. We do have to make it better. We have to make it better by training more doctors, nurses, nurse practitioners here in Canada, by recognizing foreign credentials and by allowing credentials to be portable across the country, by inviting the great doctors and nurses, Canadian ones, in the US who want to come home, encouraging them to come home, making it possible. And finally, we need to be clear with Canadians who care about their healthcare system. You cannot trust Pierre Poilievre with our universal single-payer healthcare system. All he believes in is cuts, 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 and that is one of the things that motivates me as a Liberal to defeat the Conservatives in the next election.
We are going to go into an open debate section here on this. And Mr. Baylis, yes, I will start with you on this one.
Okay.
I want to ask a follow-up question on it. Is it simply a question of money when it comes to healthcare and transfer payments, increasing that money, because I know provinces would love to have more money for healthcare, or does the structure of the healthcare system need to change?
So a few years ago, the federal government announced something like $40 billion more in healthcare spending, and nobody went, great, finally it's solved. We all shook our heads and said, great, we're just shoveling more money into the fire, because we do need to change the paradigm. Now, the wonderful thing I can tell you is that I have seen the technologies that can do that develop right here in Canada. I'm working with one company I'm supporting, and that they've developed is amazing in terms of electronic medical records, using artificial intelligence to wrap around and read all your records anywhere they are and produce reports accordingly. I've seen other AI developments in Canada again, where they allow doctors to spend a lot less time note-taking, in fact, no time note-taking, and everything collaged, put together for them, and doctors can be doctors. So we have the technology here. We have the ability to go forward here. This is what I'm going to bring to the healthcare system. And when I'm done, we are going to have the best healthcare system in the world. Believe it.
Ms. Gould, you're next on this one.
Thank you, Hannah. Look, universal health care and timely access to our health system is something that every Canadian deserves and should have. And it was a Liberal government that put universal health care in place. We can be very, very proud of that legacy. However, when it comes to the actual system, it is the provinces and the territories that manage and deliver care. The federal government provides transfers, but what we don't do enough of, and while I support the increase in transfers that we didn't have enough accountability for where that money was going. It can go into the general revenues of provinces and territories, and we have no way of knowing how that money is spent. And again, it's not to be accountable to the federal government. It's to be accountable to citizens. Citizens deserve to know how that money is being spent and what the outcomes they can expect are. One of the things that I did with the childcare agreements is that all of that money was contingent on specific objectives and outcomes for provinces and territories. That's what we need in healthcare. Canadians deserve timely access to a doctor. They deserve to have a family doctor or a primary care physician, and they deserve to know that when they get sick, when they need the healthcare system, it's there for them. Because our healthcare workers are working around the clock. They are doing everything they can to provide patients the care that they need, but the system itself needs to be modernized. The federal government can convene the provinces and territories. We can work with them to develop those objectives and those outcomes, but at the end of the day, it is the provinces and territories that are responsible for the delivery of healthcare, and they must be accountable to their citizens for how they are doing that.
Mr. Carney, you're up next, please.
So look at the service that we've received from our healthcare professionals over the course of the last 5 years. The enormous strains of working under the pandemic. Then the enormous strains that come after that on these professionals who are there at the front lines for us day in, day out, through the night, of a system that is short on resources, a system that has chronic care challenges as we age. We have a responsibility as the federal government to be part of the solution here. And we have an opportunity to make a systemic change because of technology. And if we have an openness, the provinces have an openness to use that in a way that empowers nurse practitioners, pharmacists, doctors, to provide a broader range of services to more people, more effectively. Last point, the federal government can help with that transition, can help with the leverage, and can help drive that change.
Ms. Freeland.
Well, Hannah, you asked, does money matter? And I do think it's really important for Liberals in particular to be clear, money does matter and money helps. And so I was really glad to be finance minister when we stepped up federal government support for the healthcare system, $200 billion. We saw that the healthcare system was under unbearable strain after COVID and that Canadians were suffering, and we stepped up and we made that commitment. I think we also have some real opportunities. Technology is a huge enabler, and I have seen in Toronto, at the University of Toronto, some amazing AI technologies being used to deliver better care in emergency rooms, better care for people after surgery. And not only is the care better, it costs less money and takes less time of trained healthcare professionals. So there are real opportunities. But I just want to conclude by saying something about the provinces. I think that transparency, is the winning ticket here. And having real transparency on healthcare outcomes across the country would help all Canadians, and it would help Canadians to see what's working and what isn't. But I do want to say to the premiers of the provinces and territories, I respect your work running the healthcare systems. It's really, really hard. And as Prime Minister, I would work really collaboratively with you and would recognize you want a healthcare system that works too, and you are the ones who are running it.
We are going to give 15 seconds to Ms. Gould and 15 seconds to Mr. Baylis before moving into the next theme.
Great, thank you. So first of all, my job as Prime Minister is to stand up for Canadians, whether that is to the opposition or whether that is to premiers. Of course, I would work collaboratively, but you have a responsibility to your citizens to deliver healthcare effectively. But one thing that I think all of us agree on this stage is protecting our public healthcare system. Pierre Poilievre is in the pockets of people who want to privatize our healthcare system for profit. That is not something that I think any Liberal stands for. We will protect our universal healthcare system for Canadians.
Frank Baylis.
So in the 1960s, when the system was designed, if you were unlucky enough to have diabetes, heart disease, cancer, you passed away much earlier. Today, we have extended your life expectancy. Now with that, that's the paradigm change that we need. Our system wasn't designed to look after those people, so we need to readapt it, redesign it to look after those people. That's how we'll have better healthcare, and it'll actually cost less.
Okay, I want to thank you for that third theme. We're going to move into our final theme of this evening. It has been whipping by, I must say. And this is, again, a one-minute question for everyone. And it is, again, a question from one Liberal from Alberta. Her name's Rhonda. She says, are you keeping, and we did hear this in the French debate last night, but not in the English so far, are you keeping or getting rid of the consumer tax? But to that, most of you here have supported this marquee government policy for years. If you agree with ending it, why do you agree with ending it now? So I am going to start with Mr. Carney on this one.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Rhonda, for this question, fellow Albertan. Yes, I support ending the consumer carbon tax, and to be absolutely clear, that's on consumers, it'd be on small businesses, it'd be on farms as well. The reason I do is twofold. One, politics is about people, and this has become too divisive for Canadians. Okay? Secondly, the contribution of the consumer carbon tax is a little less than 10% of our emissions reductions. I've spent a substantial portion of my career working on these issues, and there are better ways to accomplish those emissions reductions, particularly on my proposal, is that big polluters will pay Canadians, not taxpayers, big polluters will pay Canadians for their emission reductions and will improve the options for and the ability of those companies, who are some of our most important companies, to get their own emissions down.
Okay, we're going to come back and debate this more, but Ms. Freeland, you are next with 1 minute.
Well, since we're talking about climate action, I do want to start by recognizing the role that I think history is going to judge very positively that Prime Minister Trudeau has played on climate action. He is the first Canadian Prime Minister to really move the dial. And under his leadership, we have become a country where the economy is growing while emissions are going down. That is a huge accomplishment for our children and grandchildren. On the consumer price on pollution, I was the first candidate to come out and say I would lift that. And the reason is really simple. Democracy is about listening to people. And Canadians were very clear with us in conversations with me that they didn't think that policy worked for them. What we need is carrots. We need incentives to double down on the incentives I put in place, the Canada Growth Fund, the investment tax credits, to create a green transition that delivers jobs and growth for the Canadian economy. I know that we can do that, and I know that that's what Canadians need. And if we let Pierre Poilievre be elected, that will be the end of climate action in Canada.
Okay, we're on the 1 minute segment, and Mr. Baylis, you're up next.
Thank you. So I will implement a climate policy that will have a direct and tangible impact on fighting climate change. And it's going to be recognized, as we've all heard before, polluter pays model. And everyone is going to do their share, industries and individuals. Look, there's a cost to having our garbage collected. There's a cost to having water treatment plants. And we're happy to pay those costs because we have clean earth and we have clean water. And there will be a cost to having clean air. Anyone who tells you there's no cost to it is not being honest with you. So to answer your question about this carbon tax, presently it's not working because what it's doing is just circulating money around. So I'm going to adapt it. And what we're going to do is attack the problem directly. So I'm going to invest funds into programs and Canadian companies that are going to bring forth solutions to fight climate change directly.
And Karina Gould, you have said that you are not going to scrap the consumer carbon tax, that you will stop the increase in April. Maybe discuss that a bit.
Sure. Well, politics is also about leadership, and it's also about conviction. And I'm not going to abandon the fight against climate change because Pierre Poilievre is telling us to do that. I'm a mom of 2 young kids. I cannot leave a planet that is burning to them. I got into politics in 2015 because I wanted to be part of a government that fought climate change. And we did that. And we did that to great effect. And I am proud of that record. But I hear Canadians when they say that this policy is something that is challenging for them. And you know what? We didn't do a good job of talking about it. And when they are talking about the carbon tax, what are they talking about? They're talking about affordability. That's why we need a real affordability plan. It's not that they're against fighting climate change or they're against protecting the environment, but that also means that if you don't have the price on pollution, you don't have the rebate checks that millions of Canadians depend on every single year. If you have a plan to fight climate change, you also need to have a plan to fight affordability.
Yeah, we are, okay, let's just get right into the debate because, Mr. Carney, go.
I want to pick up on that last point, and really go to Pierre Poilievre, the difference between Pierre Poilievre's approach here. Axe the tax, he's got the T-shirt, he's got the slogan, that's all he do. He doesn't care about the rebate checks disappearing. He doesn't care about our businesses becoming more competitive. We started this evening talking about the absolute need for our country to diversify our trade, to build with new allies. Climate change, addressing climate change, and I've spent a huge part of my career addressing it, both in terms of policy and leading the largest clean energy investor in the world, okay? But a big part of climate change is about the economic opportunity. We will not have access to the European market unless we make the progress here. So we have to do 2 things. We have to supercharge some of the programs that have been put in place, so businesses are getting their emissions down. We are a clean energy superpower, and we have to make all of those households whole on the rebate checks that they will no longer receive, That requires a middle-class tax cut. It requires additional measures, including, final point, polluters paying those households so their energy is more affordable and cleaner.
We have 2 minutes and 30 seconds on the clock, and we're going to have to stick to this. So I want to get through all of you. Ms. Freeland first.
Rhonda, you asked something very specific. What was the moment when I recognized that we needed a different approach? And I can tell you very specifically what that moment was. It was a meeting I had with Wab Kinew, the Premier of Manitoba, really shortly after he was elected. And he is a great progressive leader in, I would say, the tradition of prairie progressives. He says the economic horse has to pull the social cart. I love that. And he said to me, I believe in climate action, but I've just been through an election and the people of Manitoba are telling me that the way the consumer price on pollution works doesn't work for them. Can I do a deal with the federal government where we hit our targets, but we do it in a different way? And that, to me, is leadership. Leadership is listening to people. It is not being inflexible and not telling people what their lives are like, but hearing them. And so I really believe if we want climate action, which is essential, we have to listen to Canadians. And if we fail to do that, the threat is, the danger is that Pierre Poilievre will be elected and he will dismantle all of the excellent work we have done on climate. We have to recognize that. We have to show Canadians we hear them and that we're listening to what they tell us rather than telling them what they should be thinking.
Okay, I'm going to jump in there because we do have to stick to time now. Ms. Gould, you're up next.
Thank you so much. So just a couple of things with respect to my colleagues. Literally the whole reason why we have the carbon tax backstop is because premiers across this country decided they didn't want to participate. So if Manitoba wants to participate, then the consumer price on carbon from the federal government disappears. That's what happens in Quebec. That's what happens in British Columbia. With respect to Mark and the middle class tax cut, the math just doesn't add up. If you are a middle-class individual, that tax cut is looking at about $800 a year. The carbon rebate for a family of four is $1,200 a year, and it doesn't help low-income or no-income Canadians. So it is really important to have a real conversation with Canadians, and if you don't have a plan for those checks, then we don't have a plan for affordability.
I'm going to come to you now, Mr. Baylis. We are going to go into the 1 minute segment, but it's a good follow-up to this. I know you wanted to jump in. To maximize Canada's energy advantage, new pipelines or other energy infrastructure probably is required here. What is your plan for that? And do you feel there is the private interest to get it done? Because a lot of private interest has now just gone, nope, not interested anymore.
So I have an energy security plan which I've announced, and it's going to do a number of things. First of all, as I mentioned, we're going to build 2 pipelines. And why private industry is not interested is because what happens is every time a new government comes in, they change all the rules. There's no certainty. So my idea here is that the federal government will take on the responsibility of having the approvals for the 2 corridors. We'll work with the provinces and we'll work with the Indigenous communities, get all the approvals in place, and then go to tender so people can know with certainty that they can build these 2 pipelines. That's one area of energy security. Another one is I want to invest heavily in nuclear energy, small modular reactors. Canada used to be a world leader with our CANDU reactors and nuclear energy. We have to retake that position. Third thing I want to do is invest in transmission lines. We don't have transmission lines going across the whole country. With the electrification of our economy, we're going to need those. So those were 3 points that I want to bring to the table.
Frank Baylis, thank you kindly for that. And Mark Carney, you're up next. 1 minute.
I'll go back to where we started. We're in a crisis. We need to act. We need to act to build this economy, and part of those actions is or should be around our energy sector. I would convene, as part of First Minister's, discussion of the projects of national interest, which would include both clean and conventional energy, would include pipelines, getting consensus around those projects that we're going to move forward on. Because we are a federation, we need multiple levels of government, but we need speed. And we need the federal government to move with speed. We also need to do, and we can do, and can lead in areas such as carbon capture and storage. We can lead in displacing the 70% of oil in eastern Canada that comes from the United States that is using the money to threaten us. So this is part of a bigger set of opportunities for Canada. I'd help to lead those changes, and we'd do it right from the start.
Ms. Freeland, your 1 minute starts.
I do want to go back to the critical moment our country is facing, to the existential threat that President Trump poses to our economy, to our sovereignty. And Canadians get that. One of the reasons I am so confident that we can get through this and that we can get a good deal, that actually we can successfully negotiate with President Trump, is because we are an energy superpower. Uranium, hydro, wind, traditional energy. This is a strength, and we need to double down on it. I am very proud to be the minister that got access for our energy to the Pacific. That diversification is so valuable today. It gives us an alternative to the United States. We need that more than ever. I believe there is the national will right now in Canada to double down on our energy strength, to use that as a source of economic security and also of national security, including as something that we can offer to our European and Asian allies whose support we need for our own security.
Okay. Karina Gould, 1 minute.
Thank you. Energy security is imperative not just for our economic security, but also for our sovereignty. And as Canadians, we know how to do something really well. We know how to skate to where the puck is going. And so that means that we need to have a conversation right now about what securing our energy future looks like, both with traditional energy, but also with new renewable energy. If we think about where we're going to be in 5, 10 years, where our trading partners are going to be in 5 or 10 years, we have to have a real conversation about what Canada can provide for Canadians, but also for the world. I'm from Southern Ontario, and we have incredible technology when it comes to nuclear. We have an amazing opportunity to build renewable energy here at home, but also to export our energy and our expertise around the world. This is the conversation for Canadians to be having right now, and to do it with provinces and territories and with Indigenous peoples.
We are going to go into that was the 1 minute debate. We are going to go into the 5 minute final debate of the evening. And this is a question, you can take it wherever you want. How will you differentiate yourself from the current Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau? Start with yourself, Ms. Freeland.
I'm actually going to carry on with the previous theme because
I still might come back and ask you, though.
We haven't touched on something really important to Canada, and that actually is an integral part of our energy security future and is a really positive story. And that is Indigenous participation in energy projects. One of the things I was so proud to be able to do as finance minister is create a $5 billion Indigenous loan guarantee program to allow Indigenous direct participation, ownership of natural resource projects, energy projects. This is transformational for Canada. And I think that we really need to embrace the fact that we are a country that can move forward with Indigenous prosperity, and we are a country whose path to reconciliation can include Indigenous people in Canada being partners in building the energy security we need today more than ever.
Okay, thanks. And I will come back with that other question. So I'm going to go back to my original question in this debate. How will you differentiate yourself from Prime Minister Trudeau?
Sure. Let me just first start by saying that I think it's wonderful what you raised, Chrystia. It's just that Indigenous reconciliation is about more than a relationship with natural resources. And this is something that I think we can be extraordinarily proud of, the legacy that Prime Minister Trudeau has put in place when it comes to reconciliation. And we need to be very mindful that a Pierre Poilievre-led Conservative government will back away and backtrack on this really important relationship that Canada has with Indigenous peoples. And I also just want to say that I'm actually really proud of a lot of the work that we did as a government, whether it was the Canada Child Benefit that has lifted over 500,000 kids out of poverty, the early learning and childcare agreements, or the work that we did on fighting climate change. I'm proud of that legacy and that record, and I think all Liberals can be proud of that. Where I see a big difference is in making sure that we stay and I stay connected to the grassroots. And this is something that as Liberals, I want to talk to you specifically about. We need to hear your voices. We need to hear your ideas, because it is always the Liberal membership, the Liberal grassroots that provides the next big idea for Canada and for Canadians. And so my pledge to you is to ensure that we have a robust and vibrant party that is connected in our communities, listening to Canadians and making sure that we can build that future that we want and lead Canada ambitiously into the 21st century.
So that's how you'll differentiate yourself from Mr. Trudeau?
I'm very proud of the record that we have. We've made some mistakes, absolutely. Nobody is perfect, but we've done a lot of good things for this country, and I think we need to build on that success. I can pinpoint the moment following the pandemic when inflation was getting out of control, and Canadians were saying to all of us collectively as a government, they were saying we need help with the cost of living, and we were too late to the game to address those real needs. My pledge to you is to listen to you and to respond to what your needs are today and for the future.
Thank you, Ms. Gould. Mr. Baylis, you're up next. How will you differentiate yourself from Mr. Trudeau?
So I would say that I'm the candidate here that is the most distant from Mr. Trudeau. I was elected, it was over 6 years ago since I've been in the government. And then I was not a minister, so I've not been a minister with Mr. Trudeau's government, nor have I been an economic advisor. Where I will differentiate myself greatly is that I'll be focused much more on the economy. I'll be focused on creating wealth. I'll be focused on getting more money into Canadians' pockets. That's what I'm good at. I'm also going to look at building an innovation-based economy. So I really wanted to do that. That's going to be my main focus. You need both when you're in government. You need wealth creation and you need wealth redistribution. We've done a lot of wealth redistribution to the point that we're renouncing programs we can't even pay for. And we're letting programs such as healthcare fall apart. So what I want to do is get back in there. I'm a big supporter of these programs, so I want to make sure we have the funds to pay for them. That's going to be where I'm going to be much different from the previous government.
Okay, Mr. Baylis, thank you for that. Mr. Carney, you're up next.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. Look, I'm different in the following respects. First, focus on the economy. Laser focus on the economy, and that means good jobs, people's wages growing faster than inflation. It means getting prices down. It means building homes. It means building a future for this country. Secondly, I'm much more hands-on. I'm much more of a hands-on person, hands-on manager. I focus on results and getting things done. Thirdly, and I've heard this, I'm fortunate to have support in the caucus. I hear directly from those supporters about more regular and two-way dialogue with the caucus. I meet with my supporters virtually during the course of this leadership campaign to hear their ideas, to hear their energy, to hear what's going on, what they're seeing on the ground, to share my perspectives in order to move forward.
Okay, and Ms. Freeland, I am going to come back to you on this one. I only have about 30 seconds on this. How would you differentiate yourself after being in the Justin Trudeau government for all of these years?
Well, first of all, we as Liberals have to be proud of the great things our government has done. National System of Early Learning and Childcare, Canada Child Benefit, support for seniors, CETA, NAFTA. We have done a lot, and we need to remind Canadians about that. But, you know, for me, this campaign has been a personal liberation, and I am my own person, and it is great. I personally do not believe in a style of leadership, which is a one-man band. I think that the best kind of leadership is collaborative and listening, and that's how I'm running my campaign. I believe that we have to be practical and we have to focus on jobs and growth.
Okay.
But most importantly, I am a ferocious mother, and I will fight for Canada with the same ferocity that I fight for my kids. I will fight for your kids too. And the reason I am running is I am the leader who can stand up to Donald Trump and win.
Okay, we still have closing statements as well. So this is that opportunity for each candidate. I may have to take some time away because of that. And Ms. Freeland, you are chosen as number one to have your closing statement first. So your minute 30 is there. We might have to clip it a little bit.
Well, first of all, I do hope Donald Trump, who takes a keen interest in Canada, is watching this debate, because what he will hear from all the Liberals is, we believe in Canada, we are not going to capitulate, and we are going to fight for our country. And Canadians across the country are coming together to fight for Canada. Hockey fans are belting out "O Canada." Restaurants pulling U.S. wine from their menus. Snowbirds not flying south this winter. Our country is standing strong, smart, and united. I am so grateful to be here with 3 other Liberals who love Canada, and to have the chance to talk to 400,000 Liberals who love Canada too. Now, Pierre Poilievre, he actually agrees with Trump. They both say that Canada is broken. We know that's not true. We are leading a great wave of Canadian patriotism. Let's use that passion to make our amazing country even better. I know we can do it. Let's commit tonight to fight for Canada. All 4 of us on this stage, all of us Liberals, all of us Canadians. Together, we will win.
Chrystia Freeland, thank you so much for your closing statements. Now, Karina Gould, your time.
This is a critical time for our party and for our country, and we have to meet this moment. We will only win the next election by being Liberals, proudly, not Conservative light. Not by running from the progress we've made, not by putting forward ideas that just tinker around the edges. We deserve a leader who is honest with Canadians, who can unite us around big ideas, and who has the political experience to deliver real solutions to the problems we face. A leader with a track record of standing up to bullies, a leader who won't back down. I've always been someone who will stand by what I believe in, say what I mean, and fight for what is right. I've made the hard decisions and stood up for Canadians. I believe Canada is the best place in the world to start a family, grow a business, and build a future. Because we are a nation of dreamers and doers, creators and innovators. Because Canada is where opportunity, empathy, and progress walk hand in hand. I have a vision for Canada, one that will allow us to deal with the problems we face today and be ready for those we'll face tomorrow. It's time for a new generation of leadership that understands you and is focused on you. I'm here for Canada, today, tomorrow, and for years to come. I'm the leader for the future, and the future starts now. Thank you.
Karina Gould, thank you so much. Frank Baylis, you're up next.
Thank you. So Canada is a country of wide open spaces and big ideas. And with my plan, we will build a strong and resilient economy that will benefit all Canadians. We will improve our healthcare system, and it will become the best healthcare system in the world. We will modernize our federal government so they can deliver its services to our citizens in a very effective and efficient manner. And yes, we will repel and we will overcome the attacks of President Trump. Now, in the last 10 years, the world has changed profoundly. And now, as a country, we need to go in a new direction. As you look to choose your next leader, I would ask you to reflect on these 3 points. I have the best, most credible plan to build a strong, resilient economy. I'm best suited to defeat Pierre Poilievre and expose him for exactly what he is. He's a career politician who likes to make up slogans and nothing else. And I have the background, the experience, and the expertise to firmly stand up to President Trump. I will successfully defend our nation. I will defend it against his attacks on our economy, on our culture, and yes, our sovereignty. My fellow citizens, I represent that new direction. So let's be bold. Let's be ambitious. Together we will build a proud and prosperous Canada. My name is Frank Baylis, and to make this happen, I need your support.
Mr. Baylis, thank you so much for your closing statement. And finally, we go to Mark Carney.
Thank you, Hannah. Fellow Liberals, my fellow Canadians, from coast to coast to coast, you've told me that you're anxious in the face of an uncertain future. You've told me that you're looking for positive change, that you want a leader that bridges divides. You want a plan that defends our interests and creates opportunities for everyone. Every experience in my life, whether by accident or design, has led me to this moment. I'm ready. It's true, I'm not a career politician. I am a pragmatist who knows how to get things done. I've managed economic crises, built strong economies, and run tough negotiations. And this gives me the experience to lead Canada at this crucial time. We're facing a very different world to the one we've known all our lives. The Canadians are ready to unite and stand up for our country. We will seize this moment to win for Canada. I love our country. Canada has given me everything. My family, my education, my values. And in return, I'm ready to give everything for Canada. Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to the end of the English Liberal leadership debate. I want to thank all 4 candidates for a great job this evening. Voting does start tomorrow. I know. And then the announcement of the next leader of the Liberal Party will be made on March the 9th in Ottawa. So congratulations to all of you for putting your name in to do this, and look forward to seeing the results. Thank you kindly, and thank you for watching.
And thank you, Hannah, for
Thank
doing
you,
a
Hannah.
great job.
Yeah.
All right, you have been watching the second and final leadership debate for the Liberal Party of Canada. The 4 candidates you see there on stage now getting ready to shake hands and hug as the logo comes up, competing in English tonight. Hi, I'm David Cochrane, the host of Power and Politics. I'm here with CBC's chief political correspondent, Rosemary Barton. We've also got with us Greg McEachern, a former Liberal ministerial staffer, Fred Delory, a former Conservative campaign manager, Melanie Richer, former communications director for the federal NDP, and Sherelle Evelyn is the managing editor of the Hill Times. Okay, if we were expecting more fireworks and aggression in English than what we got in French, that is not what happened in this conversation. Again, a few moments of pushing and prodding, but for the most part, respectful and sometimes granular. So I want to kind of do what we did last night and go around and get quick takes on sort of some questions I have about the debate. So Rosie, let's start with you. When you look at the 2 hours, did this debate have significant, memorable moments that stood out and could define where this is?
I don't know that it had memorable moments. Should I just stop there? But I do think it was better than last night. I think people were more substantive in their answers. I think they fleshed out policy. I think they tried to press one another a little bit. Karina Gould in particular really pointing to try and get some answers out of Mark Carney. So I think it gave you a good look at who these people are and the kinds of things they say they will do.
Mel?
Yeah, the thing that I really picked up on is who's talking about real people in a way that real people can understand. And Karina Gould was really the only one who was able to do that and get her message across to folks in a way that they would probably understand. So that's what I noticed today.
Okay, so maybe refine it from was there a memorable moment to what stood out for you then? What was memorable to you?
We'll
get a second chance.
You might get a second.
Either way, answer the question.
You have a whole show on Sunday. Come on. I think, look, I'm looking at what friends are writing me, what I'm seeing on social media, what I saw tonight. Karina Gould really kind of owned the stage tonight. She was very impressive. I see this as a Liberal who is not committed to any candidate. This is a head and heart thing. They need, or the Liberal Party needs Mark Carney. The money is coming in, support's coming in, polls are going up. But what they saw from Karina Gould tonight, they were very, very happy with.
Some fire there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Fred, your thoughts?
Look, I think Carney needed to really perform in this debate and punch through and leave Canadians with something, and I don't think he did that. So I think what I'm going to remember from this debate was missed opportunity for him. He could have done it, and he didn't.
Okay, we'll come back to the next question. Sherelle, your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't think Mark Carney got hurt during this debate. I don't think he necessarily helped or really sold himself. I'm sure there are some people who are very happy and said, hey, I was looking for policy, I was looking for substantive ideas, and I guess I got them because they tried to get really granular on some of the things. But I don't know if we really got enough of a pushback, as much as each candidate sometimes said, oh, I'm going to gently push back on this, I'm going to push back on this. I don't know if we really got that.
Okay, so Fred, my second question was going to be, did Mark Carney cement the front-runner status, or did he underwhelm? You seem to think he underwhelmed here.
Well, he's winning this race. As Greg pointed out before the debate, he's raised $4 million in very little time. This is sewn up. The Liberal leadership race is done. Now, I know Max Bernier was supposed to win his in 2017. Peter MacKay was supposed to win in 2020. Neither did. But Poilievre did crush in 22, and this is going to be like that. So I think tonight he needed to talk to Canadians more. He needed to reach out. It wasn't about the Liberal race anymore. It was about talking to Canada. Here's his opportunity to introduce himself. And I'd say he failed at that.
So, Sherelle, because you also went there on the first go-round, do you agree with Fred on that? Where do you see it?
Yeah, I don't think that he really got across, I am the person that you want to invite into your homes, into your living rooms. We've seen a little bit of that when he's, not in this format, standing behind a podium, trying to get his ideas across quickly in a debate format. I don't know if this is his best format. So I don't know if people will really go say, yes, he might be the economic serious person that we need, but is he the politician that we need for the moment?
Right. He's often a different guy in scrums than he is in these moments. Greg, what do you think?
I'd agree with that. I mean, I watched Carney on his way in, riffing with reporters, talking to supporters. He is really good at that. He is really good. Last night in his scrum afterwards, he was answering a question, and he said, you know what, I'm already on the record on this, so I'm going to give you a bonus question. And it was a little elbow jab to Poilievre, who is now restricting questions to certain news organizations and a certain number. Right. I think his best moment for him tonight would be something that is ad-worthy when he went after Poilievre on the security clearance, probably one of his strongest moments.
I've already filled out the paperwork, and it's easy. Yeah, Mel, your thoughts on his performance there?
Yeah, I think more of what we've really seen, to your point of, is he the person for the moment? I'll just remind folks that people still care most about affordability. And he was really unable to talk about affordability. He was able to talk about the economy, but not necessarily able to talk about cost of living, how that's impacting people, and what he would do in a real way that would make, help families make ends meet, more than just talking about what he would do to the economy, which is really important, which would have an impact on that. But if you're not able to tell that story, how are you to expect that people understand what you will do to make their lives better?
Yeah, he talked about the food basket going up, which is a Statistics Canada measurement as opposed to my groceries, right? Rosie, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of you. I think we heard, good performance by a central banker, right? Who was trying to explain to Canadians how he would tackle some really important issues, all of them sort of, dealing with the economy and responding through economic growth. And that's maybe what Canadians want right now. They want a serious person who understands these serious issues. But if they were looking to connect with Mr. Carney, he is not able at this stage to be a politician who can say, this is the reason why it matters to you. I'm hearing you. I've talked to you. And, Karina Gould and Chrystia Freeland both were able to do that, to go back to the name of someone they met, to something that happened, to something they've experienced. And that is something, unfortunately, that does take time to develop as a politician, and he isn't doing that yet.
I'm imagining a debate now between Mark Carney, Tiff Macklem, and Stephen Poloz about the central bankers. Greg, start with you. Did Freeland or Gould or Baylis have a punch-through moment? Did they, like you mentioned, Karina Gould right off the top, getting some positive feedback? Did you see something there from them to close the gap on Carney? And
again, I'm going to qualify the audience on this one in that maybe it wasn't for Canadians, definitely for Liberals. When Karina Gould started talking about ignoring rural areas and rural industries, agriculture, aquaculture, things like that, that is a big thing you hear from backbench Liberal MPs and the Liberal rank and file. So she was saying things that Liberals want to hear around, yes, we've had a lot of electoral success in big urban areas, but don't forget there's other parts of Canada that we're talking about right now.
Right. So Mel, you were talking about this, who relates to the average person. Did anyone punch through in a way that maybe closes their gap with Mark Carney tonight?
Yeah, Karina Gould, the same thing. If I'm, a regular person, not necessarily voting in this race, but trying to figure out who could speak to me in an election cycle, who could understand the realities that I'm faced with and able to address those in a way that I understand, that communication aspect, for sure, was able to go above and beyond the other candidates on the stage, I think.
Cheryl, your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I would entirely agree. I mean, she's said quite, directly that, when they're talking about productivity and things like that, she's basically saying, well, what does that even mean? People don't care about that. It doesn't relate to their life. And she's saying, as Prime Minister, you have to connect people to the policies. And that's what she was doing. Yes, Mark Carney pushed back on that a bit, and because it was basically a jab at him. But she was, I think she was the most human. She put the most human face on what it is that she was trying to get across.
Yeah, the granular conversations on defense procurement, I'm not sure how that resonated with people, but it was there. Fred, did you see anyone maybe make the move against the frontrunner there?
Well, I'm going to be as boring as that debate was and agree with everybody. Karina Gould did perform the best out of that.
These debates are rubbing off on everybody.
Yeah, we're all getting along and agreeing. But no, she was the one that seemed like the more normal person out of all of them, and not just stilted. And like Chrystia Freeland continues to become even worse and worse communicator every time I see her.
Really? You think she was interesting there at the end where I'm not anybody else's person, I'm my own person, and like this is the Chrystia Unleashed thing that didn't resonate, you don't think?
Then who has she been for the last 9 years as the second most powerful person in this country? Like you're destroying your own credibility in everything that you've done. So it makes no sense. Did she take credit for that stuff or not?
Okay, we're 90 seconds away from the beginning of the scrums. Rosie, your thoughts on that in terms of what we saw from the people who are not the frontrunners, whether they were able to close a gap here?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm not going to be different than anyone. I thought Karina Gould had a very good night. I don't know that Karina Gould showed herself to be someone that can be Prime Minister to take on Donald Trump. I don't think she's playing in the same ball game. So she had a very good night for what she needs to do, which is to differentiate herself, set a course for the future, and show people who she is, which is a good goal for her. I thought Chrystia Freeland had a better night than last night. She was much clearer in some of her ideas, but she's, as Fred points out, it's very hard to defend the legacy of Justin Trudeau, as she did a number of times, and then say that she would do X, Y, and Z completely differently. So she continues to be stuck in that very difficult spot. And listen, Frank Baylis, I think, would be, it sounds like Liberals would happily welcome him into caucus. He's got lots of interesting ideas. So I don't think anyone had a terrible night. I don't think anyone punched through.
Okay, here he is, Frank Baylis. As the Liberal MP said to me, people may not know who he is, but people who know him like him. Now we're going to listen to him.
They called for the resurrection of Keystone XL after saying he didn't need Canadian oil. Just wondering if you support the resurrection of Keystone XL, and of course, being a business case, trying to build a large pipeline, how would you resurrect such a project?
First of all, yeah, I think that's excellent news. It also it's really Mr. Trump, eh? So first of all, he's going to tax our exports at 25%, and he wants to build a pipeline. I think people should look at that and say to themselves, okay, what is he really doing? He's trying to reduce the cost of energy to the Americans because that's going to really have a positive impact on his economy. So when he says, I'm going to put 25% tariffs on every export from Canada, keep in mind that almost 50% of it is energy. 50% almost is energy. He's not going to tax that at all. That's why I've been calling for us to call out Mr. Trump and say, look, enough of these fake threats. We're going to call your bluff. That's what I want to do. Now, as respects to Keystone, I think it's a wonderful idea. That's good for us. Pour le Keystone XL, l'oléoduc Keystone XL, je serais très content si on va le construire parce que ça nous donne un autre marché pour vendre
because it would give us a further market for our natural resources. Having said that, I do want to say, and this is very important, that we need to be able to ship our natural gas to the east and the west, and therefore diversify our markets. Hello, Mr. Baylis.
Justement dans la même lignée,
along the same lines,
la volonté de Monsieur Trump
do you think Mr. Trump's determination to go forward with the Keystone XL project changes your approach when it comes to diversifying Canada's export markets to other countries? No, not at all. And it's very important that we build those two gas pipelines to take our gas to the eastern eastern side of the country and to Europe, and also to the western side of the country to send our gas to Asia. And that would be good for the environment as well, so it would be win-win. When it comes to Keystone, that's good news, but let's not forget that this is Mr. Trump. So let's look at the details before we get involved in that. So it's with the details that we have to understand what he's talking about. Now, yesterday, there were a lot of common comments, responses that were made by the candidates with respect to the threats from Mr. Trump. How do you consider that you set yourself apart from the other candidates in that regard? Well, I have 40 years of experience in negotiating with Americans. So I have already been involved in that kind of approach. And as I pointed out already, our government, unfortunately, did make some mistakes. The Prime Minister should never have gone to President Trump's personal home. He should never have given him anything on the border before we had negotiated something on this. So we have been giving and giving without getting anything back. So the way this was managed, well, let's just say I would change that completely. And I know how to get involved in negotiations. I know how to comport myself. I have experience that others do not have in that regard.
The party uses a ranked ballot. Are you going to direct your supporters as to how they should rank other candidates on their ballot? If so, how?
No, I don't have any plans to do that. I think that I'm trying to sell myself to Canadians. What I'm trying to do is tell them who I am, what I stand for, and where I'm coming from. And I'll let the people make their decisions with respect to ranked ballots. I understand there's sometimes des ententes. People get together and say, let's do this or let's do that. That's not been the game that I'm playing. I understand that people might say I'm a bit of a dark horse. That's fine. But I can tell you, every time I come out and every time I get a bit of media, all I get is inundated with more and more people want to support me. So I actually think that things are going very well for me. My only challenge is time, quite frankly, because I'm sure that the more time I have, the better and better it's going for me. So I'm really focused on winning it, not trying to make a deal or position myself in any way.
Right. If you win, the last two elections have ended up with minority governments. Would you be willing to, would you ever seek a supply and confidence agreement with another party so yours could stay in power?
So, first things first, I'd have to win the leadership. I haven't won that yet. I tend to focus on one thing at a time. The second thing I would say is that today, just because of the threats of Donald Trump, these are very fundamental threats to our economy and our sovereignty. We have to look at government a slightly different way. So I would be ready to work with anyone so long as they're willing to work together to repulse and protect Canada against the threat of Donald Trump. Having said this, clearly you have someone like Mr. Poilievre, and he's focused strictly on himself. He's not interested in doing what's right for the country. I don't even think he's interested in doing what's right for his own party. He wants to be prime minister at all costs, and so I'd be very surprised if he was willing to do any kind of entente, any kind of deal. But I would only be looking at doing something that would be good for Canadians. Not good for the Liberal Party, but good for Canada.
Merci beaucoup. Je veux juste savoir, il y a à peu près combien de questions pour que...
Il y a une file d'environ 20 reporters.
OK. Est-ce que je pourrais vous demander, s'il vous plaît, de limiter à une question par personne?
Limit yourselves to one question per person so that we can get through as many people as possible. Let's be free to everyone. Chrystia Noël, Radio-Canada. What are your plans when it comes to the next election, and which riding will you be running in? Well, I'm not the leader yet, and I'm a long-standing Liberal, and I have held many positions in the Liberal Party. Over 4 of those 48 years, I was a member of Parliament. Now, if I don't win, I don't know whether the new leader will want me to run or not. So it's not up to me to make that decision if I'm not the leader. But are you committing to run even if you're not the leader? Well, if the leader wants me. But my commitment is very clear. I do want to be involved one way or another in supporting the Liberal Party.
Next question, please.
Hi, Harry North for the Montreal Gazette. You spoke on building pipelines. How will you work with provinces who may not be as supportive of these?
So I think that we have not done a good job of selling pipelines. We talked about this yesterday, for example, the Energy East pipeline, which the Legault government gave a bit of pushback and the federal government just threw up their hands right away and gave up. Now, what I would tell people and what I would tell Quebecers, you asked me how I do this, is I say, look, there's 3 ways oil moves. One is by boat, one is by train, and one is by pipeline. Now, with respect to boat, that oil coming up the St. Lawrence, which is so critical to us, one leak, it's an ecological disaster of epic proportions. Now, when it comes to trains, in Quebec, we've already had Lac Mégantic. So we know how dangerous that is. We know how dangerous it is. The safest way to move oil is by pipeline. So I would make that argument, and I would have those discussions with the provinces, the premiers, and I think we could convince them, especially given the present threat that we're all feeling from President Trump.
Thanks very much. We're going to, just one question, sorry, per person, because I only have 2 minutes left on the clock. Thank you. One next question, please. Was that it? Okay, then we can take a second question then. All right. If there's no more questions, then that's a wrap then. Thank you.
Alors, merci beaucoup.
Okay, that is Liberal leadership candidate Frank Baylis taking questions from reporters after the debate. We're expecting the other candidates to come in fairly rapid succession. I believe Karina Gould would be next, then Chrystia Freeland, and then Mark Carney. Some interesting stuff there, Rosie, on we're going to call his bluff to Donald Trump, he says. Pointing out the incoherence of Donald Trump saying we don't want your oil, but let's build Keystone XL, and then saying maybe we shouldn't have given him this border stuff and gone to Mar-a-Lago. What do you make of what Frank Baylis had to say there?
I mean, he's an outside of the box thinker, right? And that's he's putting some different kinds of ideas out there. He also said during the debate that Donald Trump won't stop until he gets the lesson that he can't get away with this. The other idea that he had, which was kind of interesting, was that if he were made prime minister, he'd go down and visit the Mexican president.
Yes, that's true. All right, here's Karina Gould.
Global News. You seem to push back more on your colleagues today in English than you did in the French debate. What changed?
Look, this was an easy debate. This is a debate amongst friends, amongst family, amongst Liberals. The real debate against Pierre Poilievre, against Yves-François Blanchet, against Jagmeet Singh, that's going to come in the election. And we need to ensure that whoever is leading our party is debate ready in English and French. And what became clear to me both last night and tonight, that I'm the only person on that stage that is ready to take on the opposition, to fight for Canadians, and to win as a Liberal.
Next question. Hi, Cal Duggan at the Canadian Press. Was the carbon tax a bad policy, or was it just marketed badly? And just so we're clear, how long do you think that you would keep it for if you were actually Prime Minister?
So we did not do a good job as a government about talking about the price on pollution. And we allowed Pierre Poilievre to take up space on the price on pollution and, quite frankly, to mislead Canadians. What was really happening was inflation. And we didn't hear Canadians when they were saying to us, I'm having a hard time making ends meet. And Pierre Poilievre got in there and he misled Canadians on the price of pollution. So my plan is to freeze the planned increase, to cancel the planned increase, to ensure that we can give Canadians that break that they need. But I'm not going to take checks away from millions of people who rely on that money. So this is a good policy that does two things. It tackles climate change, it reduces our emissions, and it provides greater affordability for Canadians. So just because Pierre Poilievre says something doesn't mean it's true, and most of the time, it's not.
Next question.
Alex Ballingall with the Toronto Star. I think it was your closing statement. You mentioned conservative light, that the Liberals don't need conservative light. Was that something directed at Mark Carney and Chrystia Freeland? And can you expand on what you meant by that being something that the Liberals shouldn't be doing right now?
Look, what we've heard from some of my colleagues is that they are taking some conservative ideas and putting them in their platform. And you know what? That's okay if they're good ideas. But when it comes to some of the stuff that they're putting forward, they're not going to make a meaningful and tangible difference in the lives of Canadians. And Liberals win elections when we are true to Liberal values, when we are bold and ambitious and have a plan and a vision for this country. And so I am proud to be a Liberal. I'm proud to be a Canadian, and I'm not going to compromise my values, compromise my convictions, because I think that's what the polling wants.
Olivia.
Oui. Voilà.
Some of my colleagues have taken on some conservative ideas, and if they're good ideas, that's fine, but it's not about taking conservative ideas because they think that polls will support you. I'm not going to abandon Liberal ideas. I'm proud to be a Liberal. I'm proud of our record as Liberals. We've done many, many things that have improved the lives of Canadians, and Liberals win elections when we are Liberals, when we are true to our values and true to our convictions, and I don't want to change who I am just because the polls say something else.
CBC News. You said during the debate that the Liberals have lost touch with young people. Aren't you helping other parties defeat your government when you're saying things like that?
No, I'm just being honest. Look, one of the things that I think Canadians have been frustrated about, and quite frankly, I've been frustrated about, is like sometimes you just got to say the thing. You just got to say what people are feeling, and you have to be okay to say that. I mean, that's one of the things that I've heard from people is they're like, stop talking about things in policy terms or government terms. Talk about them in ways that are meaningful to folks. And if we don't identify the problem and talk about it, we're never going to find the solution. And so for me, it's been a couple of years where I have felt that we have lost touch. But I think what this leadership race offers, I think what my leadership candidacy offers, is an opportunity to reconnect with Canadians, to listen to them, and to make sure that we remain in touch with them. I've always been a grassroots politician. That's what propelled us into office in 2015, and it's what's going to make sure that a new Liberal government is there in 2025.
Bonjour, Madame Gould, Laurence Martin, Radio-Canada.
Si vous devenez Radio-Canada, if you become Prime Minister, what would your deficit be? Would it be at 70 billion? What would the number be? Give us an order of magnitude. I cannot give you a number because we are currently facing the largest challenge. We are facing the biggest challenges, the economic challenge in the history of this country. It could happen in 1 week, and we have to ensure that the federal government is there to support Canadians, either with their economic needs, either by protecting our industries in the face of Trump's tariff threat. So it would not be honest if I were to give you a number right now because we don't know what we're actually facing. And my commitment to Canadians is to ensure them that I will be fiscally responsible, but I will also protect them. But we're talking about a $70 billion deficit. Do you think that's too high? What are we talking about? Almost $40 billion of that $70 billion is the compensation provided by the federal government to the Indigenous peoples. This is not something that was spent last year. This is going to be spent in the coming years. Now, again, is it honest if you say to say otherwise? I would just like you to comment on spending. I can assure you that our spending will be responsible, but the time to cut is not now. That's Pierre Poilievre's plan, and once again, when we're facing an existential threat to our economy, that is not the time to stop spending public money, but to ensure that there are services and supports in place for Canadians so that we can come out as winners from this war. But we need to have jobs for Canadians when this is all done.
I noticed that you were one of the only people on that stage being the aggressor, specifically going after Mark Carney. What was your strategy behind that tonight in terms of making a mark and going specifically after Mr. Carney?
Look, I pushed all of my colleagues. I pushed Frank when it came to supporting our Canadian Armed Forces. I pushed Chrystia when it came to Indigenous reconciliation and on her record when it comes to the agreements on healthcare with provinces and territories. Again, I said I support those transfers when it comes to healthcare, but we need to ensure that we get a good deal for Canadians and that Canadians have accountability and transparency. And I pushed Mark on his economic ideas because this has to be a debate of ideas. The whole point of this Liberal leadership race is so that Liberals have a chance to see who we are as candidates, to make an informed decision about the vision that we are putting forward. And this is just a test run for the real debate that's going to come in the election. And Pierre Poilievre, Yves-François Blanchet, Jagmeet Singh, they're not going to be nearly as nice as I was. I had kid gloves on this morning, or this evening. You know, when it comes to the real debate, it was very clear to me that last night and tonight, I am the only one of the candidates who's ready to take on those opposition leaders tomorrow if needed.
How?
Oui. Alors, ce soir, j'ai dit que je vais poser des questions difficiles.
I would ask tough questions and I would push my colleagues because this leadership race is an opportunity for Liberal Party activists to make a real choice, to know exactly where we are on the major issues of this time, the issues facing Canadians. And I pushed everyone. I pushed Frank on the Canadian Armed Forces. I pushed Chrystia on reconciliation and healthcare, and I pushed Mark on economic issues, because today and yesterday, this was only the beginning. This was only kind of a primary, because I was actually very polite, if you will, compared to Jagmeet Singh and the other opposition leaders. The real debate will come in the election campaign. And what I said yesterday and today is that I'm the only candidate who is prepared to really debate the opposition leaders either in English or French.
It was also the fact that you see the numbers and that there are two presumptive frontrunners right now. And were you trying to make a mark tonight for this final push?
What is very clear is that I am the only candidate who is ready to lead this party into the next election, who is ready to take on Pierre Poilievre and win the next election. I have the experience, I have the chops, I have the guts, and I have the capacity to do that. What Liberals are looking for is somebody who can fight and who can win. I have always stood up for Canadians. I will always stand up for Canadians, and I'm going to win us the next election. Thank you very much. Merci tout le monde. Bonne soirée. Thank you.
Okay, that was Karina Gould, the second of the Liberal leadership candidates, Rosie, that we've heard from. I am the only person ready for the election debates, essentially selling her debate skills and her retail political skills. Not so much on the policy side of things, because she's advocating for a more progressive, more expensive sort of liberalism than I think we saw from people like Mark Carney, for example.
Yeah,
today.
and keeping the carbon tax around, which I'm not sure how popular that would be with most Canadians. But listen, Karina Gould is putting herself out there. She is aggressive. She is pushing back against her opponent. She was saying, as we were saying as she was speaking, she's ready to say the thing that Liberals don't want to say. So she is saying all the right things for the position that she is trying to put herself in here.
Once again,
whether that brings her to the leadership, I don't know. But no one could regret Karina Gould getting into this race. I don't think she comes out of this race, even if she doesn't win, in any way not improved in terms of her place and her position inside the party.
Universal basic income, things like this, like keeping the carbon tax. Oh, here comes Chrystia Freeland. We'll pick up this conversation at the time, but here is the former Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, Chrystia Freeland.
Bonsoir. That was a great debate. We have a real race, and I'm looking forward to taking your questions.
Hi, Ms. Freeland. Chris Brown, CBC. Good to see you.
Good to see you, too.
Mr. Carney went after Justin Trudeau's economic record tonight. A lot of that is your economic record. What do you say to him, please?
I say that it is extremely important for Liberals not to parrot conservative talking points. The reality is Canada is not broken. The reality is Canada has a strong fiscal position, a AAA credit rating, the lowest debt and deficit in the G7, an economic recovery from the COVID recession, which is much stronger and faster than Harper's recovery from the 2008 recession, 17 months rather than 24. There is work to do now, absolutely. Now is the time we need to focus on jobs and growth. But the central issue for the Canadian economy and for our existence as a country right now is Donald Trump. This is an existential moment. My campaign is built around that. It is built around the recognition that this is a challenge to our existence as a country, and it is built around a plan to meet that challenge, and it is built around the reality that I am uniquely the person who can meet that challenge. I've been foreign minister, so I know how to negotiate security deals with our partners. I've been trade minister, and so I know how to negotiate economic deals around the world. I've done it. And I was Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs during COVID and led a true Team Canada effort in a challenging time. So I know how to lead a united, strong, and smart response. And what I will push back on is an idea that somehow, because we can't change President Trump, that we ought not to negotiate with him. Of course we can't change him, but we can outwit him. And I know exactly how to do that. And that is why I am the best person to be leader of the Liberal Party and the next Prime Minister of Canada.
Mr. Trump, after saying he doesn't need Canadian oil today, I believe said that he would like Keystone XL to be resurrected. Do you support the resurrection of Keystone XL, and how would you get that project back?
See, it proves my point. That proves the point with which I began the debate. What I said at the beginning of the debate was Canadians shouldn't be scared of the United States. We need them, but they also need us. And that dependence that they have on us as a market and also as a source of things they desperately need, like energy, is a source of strength. And that's why we cannot be defeatist when it comes to President Trump. And we need to know that we can outwit him, that we can stand up to Trump and we can win. When it comes to Keystone XL, I have always been a supporter of that project, and the holdup is entirely on the US side. If the Americans want to build that pipeline, good luck to them. And that will actually add to our national security. It will be another avenue of their energy dependence on us.
Prochaine question.
Hi, Ms. Freeland. Zachary Chung for City News. In the conversation about Donald Trump's tariffs, you said that Canada's response should see American farmers complaining about the Canadian products that they need. Are you implying that Canadian workers would actually benefit from hurting American workers?
So American farmers have already been complaining. If you remember on February 1st, when Trump was the most clear about saying, I will impose 25% tariffs across the board on Canada, the next day, the American Farm Bureau, which is a really important Trump constituency, came out and said, Mr. President, we do not support these tariffs because more than 80% of the potash we need, which is a critical input for American farmers, comes from Canada. So American farmers themselves were pointing out to President Trump, your tariffs on Canada are a tax on us. And I think it is a very good thing for American farmers to be pointing out that reality to the president. I've spent a lot of time on US media helping to draw attention of Americans to the fact that these tariffs are a self-mutilating act. The Wall Street Journal has called this the dumbest trade war in history, and the Wall Street Journal is usually a Trump-supporting newspaper. So part of our job here is to help Americans understand how they are inflicting an injury on themselves. And the sooner they understand it, the sooner the president will back down.
Follow up? Okay. Bonjour, Lise Denis, Le Droit.
Bonjour.
Allez-vous réduire le nombre de postes dans la fonction
Will you
publique?
reduce the number of jobs in the public service, and if so, by how many? Yes, I believe that we should be using technologies such as artificial intelligence more often and use it in a practical manner, in a way that doesn't reduce services to Canadians. But we do have to reduce the number of positions in the public service, and I've already brought forward a plan to get that done. And I would just like to add this. In so doing, we will make savings that will allow us to deliver to Canadians, and that's the most important thing.
Bonsoir, Émilie Bergeron, la presse canadienne. Karina Gould a dit tout à l'heure, quelques instants, que certains des candidats dans la course à la chefferie empruntent des idées à Pierre Poilievre. Est-ce que vous vous sentez visé par ces commentaires et est-ce que vous trouvez que c'est justifié cette attaque-là, peu importe pour quel candidat?
Je suis ma propre personne.
Listen, I am my own person, and as I just said in the debate, for me, this leadership campaign is really a personal liberation because it allows me to really share my own ideas with Canadians and tell people what I think and bring out my own ideas, very personal ideas. And I am a true and proud Liberal. The Liberal Party has always been the party that understood that we can and we must build a strong economy with jobs, with investments, and with good wages, and that we can and must at the same time build a strong social safety net. So that has always been the position of the Liberal Party. And I believe that it is a serious error for Liberals to talk about or to allow other parties to talk about building a strong economy, because we are the party under Mr. Martin and Mr. Chrétien that understood that you can and must do both at the same time. But at the same time, there is a very clear difference between myself and Pierre Poilievre. In fact, there are quite a few. But I would just focus on one in particular, and it is that I am the person who knows how to defend Canada against President Trump, the person who knows how to fight against President Trump and to fight for Canada. Pierre Poilievre does not know how to do that. Pierre Poilievre agrees with President Trump. Both of them are saying that Canada is broken. Pierre Poilievre wants to become maple syrup Trump. He doesn't want to be the person who fights against Trump. And I have already demonstrated that I am the person who knows how to do that. And all the experiences in my life and the work that I've done against President Trump in the first term and defending Cochrane against President Putin when I was a journalist and when I was fighting against dictatorship, and I wrote about oligarchs and their connection to authoritarian politics. All of that, in addition to the connections I was able to make as the Minister of Foreign Affairs with democratic nations. All of that gives me the opportunity and prepares me to be the leader of the Liberal Party now and the Prime Minister of Canada, the Prime Minister that Canada needs. As a follow-up, as with the debate in French, you agreed on many things tonight during the debate in English with Mr. Carney. And yet he's your primary rival in this race. Are you comfortable with that? Are you comfortable being in agreement with him? And were you able to distance yourself from him? Well, I don't agree with you. I think that there was a clear contrast there, and I believe that I showed that I am the strongest person to fight against President Trump. I think I showed as well that I understand fully that, yes, we cannot change President Trump. But that doesn't mean we must not negotiate with him. And I have a plan to win against President Trump. And I also said, when we talked about defense and our national security, I said that it's important for us that not to take a technocratic approach, that what we need to understand now is that we are facing an existential threat, and for that reason, we must take a very significant approach at this time.
No, I've been very clear, and I've been clear in my budgets and fiscal statements that I do think we need to have a carefully managed decline in the number of public servants using natural attrition, using technologies, and that is how we can afford to provide Canadians with the affordability measures that they need.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Okay, merci beaucoup.
All right, that was Chrystia Freeland, the third of four Liberal leadership candidates we're going to hear from. Interestingly, Rosie, when she was asked about the criticism of the Canadian economy by Mark Carney, she responded to it by saying it's extremely important for Liberals not to parrot conservative talking points. It's not just conservatives, though, right? Like, this is the thing. There is a productivity challenge in the economy. It has been kept up largely by immigration, which has created problems in other ways. And, you know, this is a thing. This is a challenge that exists, and the policy mix of challenges the winner this is going to have to deal with.
Yeah, and it's a thing that economists are talking a lot about, and so Mark Carney is also talking a lot about as a way to solve some of the wage problems in this country. The other thing that she seized on, and she did also in the debate, is Mark Carney's line that we can't change Donald Trump, but we can change how we respond to him. And she actually is taking this as though it wouldn't be the right idea to take him on, positioning herself as the person that could try and, I think her language is, outwit him.
Right. Here is Mark Carney.
You promised to your colleagues to balance the budget, but then you seem to change the definition of budget balance. Now, in terms of the classic definition of a balanced budget, are you really committing to balancing the budget, and in how many years? Well, we'll see, because this is the time to build the future, and that's why I changed the budget framework. In other words, ensuring that there is operational balance with respect to most government expenses, the defense and transfers to individuals. But there are some government policies that are catalysts when it comes to private investment coming into Canada. And now is the time, in the middle of a crisis because of the American threats, when there are major technological changes happening, including artificial intelligence and clean energy, I believe that this is the time when we have a great opportunity here in Canada to invest. to invest for the future of our country. A small amount of federal dollars could really change things significantly and could lead to a capital deficit, but it would be less than 1% of GDP. Not more than that at this time. You also talked about an emergency when it comes to introducing pipelines in Canada. Would Quebec have its right to say no to pipelines going through its territory? Yes, absolutely. There's no doubt about that.
One question per journalist. Thank you. Une question par journaliste.
Olivia Stefanovich, CBC News. Why is it that you can make time to fill out your security clearance papers but won't proactively disclose your corporate interests?
Because I received those security papers as part of this process for the leadership debate. The real question is, why can I fill out my security papers in the course of 2 weeks, arrange for an interview, have a police background check, be in a position to get my security clearance, and Pierre Poilievre, after 3 years, can't do any of those things, at a time when we know there's foreign interference in our democracy and our country is under threat. And I'll say one other thing. I've had security clearance in the past. I've had Five Eyes security clearance in the past. This is important information. And the idea that you could lead a major political party in this country, let alone think you could be prime minister without having access to this information, it's absolutely irresponsible. That's the question.
But then why won't you proactively disclose your corporate assets?
Just feel I'm in the middle of a leadership campaign. I will be subject to all the conflict of interest rules and the ethics rules. I will happily comply with all of them. It's a straightforward process. That will begin as soon as this process ends, if I'm selected as leader of the Liberal Party.
Next question, please. Question.
Hi, Mr. Carney. Brian Platt with Bloomberg. You've talked in general about your budget and approach, but you haven't gotten into very many specifics. When you talk about a tax cut, how are you approaching taxes? How do you want to cut? Are you talking about an income tax cut? And if so, how broad?
Yeah, okay. So, Brian, thank you for the question. There's several aspects. Some that we've been very specific about, others which we will be specific about in the coming weeks. Where have we been specific? We've been specific that we're eliminating the consumer carbon tax. We're taking a variety of other measures around that. And one of those measures that is related to, but not exclusively related to that, because it's a broader aspect, is a middle-class tax cut that will more than make up for the loss of the rebate that Canadians receive. So maybe just to be clearer than maybe it was on the stage in that debate, those numbers vary by province. The national average is about $800 for a family of four, not a different number that was mentioned. But more broadly, we'll calibrate middle-class tax cut so that it is at least making up for that. It's an important aspect. We will also, I've been very clear, that we will reverse this increase in the capital gains tax that the government put in place. This is a crucial point for two reasons. One, obviously it has a tax impact for those who have put money at risk to build this country, to build businesses, build this country. This is a time to build. This is a crucial aspect of our economy. We have an opportunity to build millions of homes, an opportunity to become an energy superpower in both conventional and clean energy, an opportunity, again, we're here in Montreal, one of the centers of artificial intelligence, an opportunity to take our leadership forward on that. And half of the debate was the discussion of how we react to the Americans and how we protect us for the future. Well, part of that is we need to catalyze, and it went to the first question as well, we need to catalyze enormous private investment. The great news is we can do it, but we need bold policies in order to do that. We need big changes to economic policies. These are big, big changes, both in terms of how we manage the budget and how we're going to change the tax system. role of government and who our trading partners are going to be. But these are big changes that are really, really going to deliver for Canadians. It's going to allow us not to get up in the morning and look on X or Truth Social and wonder what's coming from south of the border. Thank you.
Next question, please. Prochaine question.
Bonsoir, Frédéric Plante with the Globe and Mail. You were the vice chairman at Brookfield Asset Management prior to
the chair. I was the chair.
Sorry. In the fall, they moved their head office from Toronto to New York. Did you approve of that decision, and what does this say about your commitment to growing Canada's economy and betting on Canada as for now?
Okay. So two things. I'll just correct a few factual things. One, I was chair of Brookfield Asset Management. I ceased to be chair on the 15th, I think, of January when I announced for leadership. Also ceased to be chair of Bloomberg as well. Ceased to be United Nations Special Envoy on Climate Action and Finance. Ceased to be a number of other things. So I resigned all my positions because I am all in for Canada, all in for this leadership, all in during this time of crisis to build our great country, okay? That's the first thing. Second, the decision, the formal decision of the board, happened after I ceased to be on the board. I do not have a connection with Brookfield Asset Management. No longer have a role, obviously, as I resigned in the middle of January. Third thing I'd note, though, is that Brookfield has several companies that represent about 10% of the Toronto Stock Exchange. It is one of the biggest investors in this country. It is one of the biggest investors in the world. And it shows the ability of this country to build. We need more of that building here in Canada. But we need government policy in clear direction in order to do that. And that's the direction that I can bring to build Canada for the future. And it is not the direction that someone like Pierre Poilievre takes his marching orders from Donald Trump, his attack lines from the MAGA world can bring that level of investment to our country. Thank you.
Dernière question, last question, Christian Noël.
Bonjour, Christian Noël de Radio-Canada. Pour équilibrer un budget,
to balance the budget, you will have to make cuts. Do you think that you will have to make cuts, and where will you make them? Not cuts to the public service. Second, not cuts in transfers to provinces. No cuts in transfers to individuals either, but a major increase in productivity and federal programs. For a long time now, the federal government has focused on results. Has not focused on results, but my government will.
Oh, in English, yes, in English.
I'm allowed to answer in English. Sorry, they're strict on the my apologies. They're strict on the time for things to be equal, but for the English translation. Question was cuts in the budget or to balance the budget, the operational budget, how would we do it? Would there be cuts? En effet, ouais. No cuts to public service, no cuts to transfers to provinces, no cuts to individuals, okay, absolutely clear. Focus on broader program spending, which is a subset of the overall budget. One of the advantages I can count. I know how the budget works. I've worked on budgets over the years. It's a subset of the budget with a focus immediately on increasing the productivity of those programs. For too long, the focus of governments here has been about inputs, in other words, dollars spent. You often hear about programs, and the answer is X $100 million spent or Y billion dollars spent, not about what the objective is. We have to manage towards those objectives. And I'll add one other thing just from the debate, and thank you all, by the way, for coming and watching the debate and following all these issues. It's hugely important. I thought Mr. Baylis made a number of important points in this regard. He and I both see an ability to bring technology and others in order to multiply the impact. And this is crucially important. We need a government that cuts ribbons more than makes announcements. Thank you very much.
Thank you, merci.
Okay, that was Mark Carney, the last of the 4 Liberal leadership candidates that we're going to hear from tonight. You have heard the debate. We have now listened to the scrums, and we're going to get some reaction to all of it from our panel that has been following along throughout this. Former Liberal ministerial staffer Greg McCackern, former NDP Communications Director Melanie Richer, National Conservative Campaign Manager Fred Delory, and Managing Editor of the Hill Times, Sherelle Evelyn. Greg, Mark Carney there, taking some shots of Pierre Poilievre about a security clearance, taking some questions about his personal wealth and his lack of disclosure there, saying he doesn't need to comply until he wins or gets elected, and will if that happens. What's your takeaway, what you heard from Mr. Carney there?
I think we're seeing where he needs to be sharper on. I think tonight during the debate, he was talking a lot about the economy, bringing everything back to his strength. And he did it a little bit at the end where he complimented Frank Baylis. And again, it was on the economy. I wasn't really familiar that much with the Brookfield issue until it came up on your earlier panel.
Yeah.
And I think, Mel was saying something where he had an answer later in the, he had a fact later in the answer that he should have probably led with. They've got to get sharper on that. I think there is an explanation there. I'm not sure I heard everything that I heard earlier that the company may still be located.
If you want to be, like, there's various components of the company, but, the part that moved, if they want to be on the NASDAQ and other U.S. stock exchanges, you need to be headquartered in the U.S. for that to happen. The parent company is still in Toronto, and he says he was gone beforehand.
I didn't think this was going to have legs, but I saw it, in 2 questions tonight. They've got to nail that down.
Right.
But other than that, I think, this is the kind of calm, the stuff he was talking about in terms of supporting workers. People want a calm voice at a time when there's a turbulence, south of our border.
Right.
And I think that's what he's got to play to his strengths on.
Okay. Fred, what are your thoughts there? He was dealing with a lot of questions that have been part of the criticisms we've seen from the Conservatives in particular leading up to these debates. What did you make of what he had to say?
It was interesting how he fixated on weird things first, like about his title, whether he was, he was called vice chair, and he seemed to take great offense at that. He's the chair, and he said it he interrupted the questioner, and then again started his answer delivering it. The way he answered a lot of these things, he didn't feel as prepared as he could have been. As Greg pointed out, he could have had tightened up messaging on this stuff. If you have a story to tell it. But that seems to be, I think, one of the weaknesses he has is communicating in a clear way that people will actually understand. He is a bank of governor. He's a banker. He's a central banker. Talking to everyday people is not something he does. He made a comment during the debate, and I'm seeing it all over social media. He talked about productivity and during the about how people need to be more productive, essentially, and that's why we can't afford groceries. And it's being construed as saying people aren't working hard enough. And I don't know if that's what he meant.
What he means is better productivity means higher wages, so more buying power.
The way he phrased it, it puts it in a bad light.
Yeah. Mel, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the press conference, you could really tell that he may be the only one who hasn't had experience being a politician. It seemed like most reporters were able to get under his skin and get under his skin easily, and the inability to kind of tame that and go to exactly where you want to go. You can't do that in an election cycle. When you're, on a debate stage with the other leaders, that's something that you need to get a lot better at. The things that he kept repeating in the scrum that I had actually written down during the debate is when he talks about investment, he talks about investment in developers. He talks about investment in people who takes risk. He talks about, removing the capital gains tax. Those are all things that, to me, sounds like you're investing in, big business, you're investing in people who have a lot of money, you're not necessarily investing in people. And in a time where, again, folks are worried about affordability, they're worried about how they're going to make ends meet, if that's all you're hearing and how this person's going to make your life better, there's going to be a communications issue there.
Okay. Sherelle, your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't think I differ too much from what everybody else has said. Speaking as a journalist, obviously, things that you would ask, a central banker, those are probably different interviews that you would get as leader of as a political party. Yeah. And he is having to come to terms with that, Mark Carney, that, sometimes you're going to get asked things that maybe you feel that you've already answered or you feel that you've already expressed, and why are you still bothering me about this? And that's just part of the job, because until you give an answer that, we deem acceptable, then that's just going to keep happening. And we did see, him seem like he's getting his back up, and
And maybe if he has done some more of the media interviews with Canadian media throughout this cycle, that could have prepared him a little bit more for this whole thing that we're doing right now.
Yeah, it never occurred to me that maybe he should talk to the Canadian media a bit more. Where do you think the race goes?
Be on the show,
sure. Now that you mention it, where do you think the race goes from here, Greg?
I honestly, as I said to you Friday night, I asked the question and wondered if I was going to, get in a bit of trouble. Is Chrystia going to come in third? Is Karina going to come in second? And one of the things I noticed last week when the final amount of money was due, when the second to last one, Karina Gould sat here with you and talked about how she needed that $125,000 to stay in, and then there was an additional $125,000. Never heard anything more, and she paid 4 or 5 days early. Yeah. I think that was kind of a tell about where she's moving.
Okay, I got 20 seconds for everybody. Fred, where does it go?
We already know where it goes. Carney's going to win, landslide victory, and we're going to go right into a general election. And I don't think he's being tested in this race, and I don't think that's a good thing for him.
Yeah.
The party.
All right. Well, we'll talk more about that maybe on Friday. I think we'll have the opportunity. Mel, your thoughts on what happens now in the race?
Yeah, just the one point of Karina Gould saying, I'm the only leader who can take on the opposition leaders. I thought that was interesting, the prefacing to the election and who's best positioned for that. I think that may actually have been an attack that may land coming out of this. But obviously, to your point, I think it doesn't change much outside of.
That's an interesting pitch to Liberals, right? To mark her second, if not mark her first, depending on where things go. Sherelle, your thoughts on what we're going to watch for in the next little bit of the race?
Are they going to take away? Is the party going to take away the idea that maybe we don't have to just stick to the status quo, and take away maybe something that Karina Gould said. Sometimes you just have to say the thing, and it's not necessarily saying that Canada is broken. It's saying that we can do better, and not just better is possible or whatever the old slogan was, but to say, hey, we know that we have to shift our approach because we were in this position. So how can we take what we learned from this race and move forward?
Okay, we've got to leave it there because we're going to give the network back. I want to thank Rosemary Barton, our chief political correspondent, who is here, Mel Riche, Greg McEachern, Fred Delory, and Sherelle Evelyn. The Liberals will pick their leader on Sunday, March 9th, a week and a half from now. That's it for this special edition of Power and Politics, covering the last and final Liberal leadership debate. We're going to hand things over now to Adrian Arsenault with The National, which is already in progress. I'll see you tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern Time here on CBC News Network. I'm David Cochrane. Thank you for watching, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.